This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
3 minutes after 10. Good morning, James, asks Gary. Is LBC going to show footage of the ambulances with flashing blue lights being stuck in a sea of tractors yesterday? It's a radio station, mate. I know, I'm teasing. We've got a very big online presence. The short answer is I don't know. I've always found mention of ambulances in the context of those sort of public protests deeply disingenuous. So it's not somewhere I'd go. But I imagine people who can't shut up about ambulances when it's just stop oil protesters or environmental protesters disrupting traffic, I imagine they've gone all in on this. I've been completely honest about the fact that with the farmers, it actually happened. Whereas it was largely mythical when it was cited as a reason why we should be carting away people trying to save the planet. I guess I hope that answers your question. 4 minutes after 10 is the time. The reason I opened with that is because I'm postponing the conversation that we're going to have. And do you know what? I probably shouldn't say this, but I will completely understand if you don't want to listen to it. I turned the news off last night. Don't do that very often. Do you know when I turned it off? Can you guess which bit of the Sara Sharif story I found unbearable? It was the footage. I can't even tell you, man. It was a footage of her singing. It was a footage of a happy little girl strumming away on a guitar and singing a little song, interspersed with interviews with her former headmistress, the headmistress at the school before her parents, her father and her stepmother, decided to homeschool her in order to minimise the likelihood of anyone noticing how battered and bruised her body was. The image, and the other one that I think you would probably be forgiven for turning away from, and the point is, of course, that we can't turn away. I mean, I empathise and understand if you don't want to do this today. You don't have to, but I do. Some of us do. You know that. The other one is when she was tiny and she'd managed to get two dummies into her mouth. They're just a really cute little picture of a really cute little girl who's now dead because her father was monstrous and her stepmother was scum. But that's not it, is it? The story doesn't end there. I heard one interview yesterday which I thought made a very important point, which was that they are the people responsible for her death. They are the people responsible for her death. It's tempting, and I haven't witnessed it today. I've got to be honest with you. I may have not been paying attention, but normally people are very quick. People in my line of work are incredibly quick to make lazy presumptions, lazy assumptions, lazy accusations against social workers and other members of the public services. I don't know how helpful that is. Was it Baby P's death that prompted the, I think Ed Balls was in charge at the time and went after the head of children's services at a local council. I think she subsequently won a tribunal for unfair dismissal. So that's what happens when you allow the more hideous elements of tabloid journalism to influence you or to set the agenda, set the narrative. And yet it is clearly ridiculous to contend that opportunities were not missed, that chances were not missed. And I wonder how many people, you've heard that story in the headline, haven't you, just now? This is just England. There'll be other numbers for other parts of the UK. 480 children in England died or were seriously harmed by abuse or neglect. Some of those, well, almost all of those names you will never know. It's a curious sort of conflation of circumstances that pushes some of these stories onto front pages. This one, I'm afraid, has journalistic explanations. The fact that the murderers fled the country, the fact that the poor child's body was found while her father and stepmother were already in Pakistan. The confession was made. So there are lots of elements to the story that make it stand out from the other 480 tales of children killed or seriously harmed by abuse or neglect. That's why we only know some names. 480 last year alone. And of course names like Peter Connolly, Daniel Pelker, Victoria Columbier, Star Hobson, Carol Matthews, Arthur Labinio Hughes, Logan Mwangi, Hakeem Hussein, all of these names resonate and ring with a profound sense of horror. And we don't know. We don't know. The bit we don't get is the failure to intervene. But what does that mean? Who failed to intervene? You know, the father was on a watch list from the very beginning. The ugliest part of the story in many ways is the fact that the access to the little girl, culminating in him getting custody, was caused by a belief from the authorities that the stepmother was a civilizing influence on a man who had a long record of abusive and violent behavior. So the stepmother's presence, the biological mother of Sara, a woman called Olga, was told that because this stepmother was now in the picture, he had changed, the father had changed, and therefore should be allowed unsupervised. Do you know who was the person charged with supervising access when the mother visited the child? When Olga visited Sara, do you know who the person was that the authorities decided was best placed to supervise those visits? This is what I mean about this story. Every turn, every twist, every rock that you look under, there's 10 more rocks. Do you know? Do you know who it was? It was the stepmother. So because accusations had been made against the mother, the idea that she had possibly been abusive towards Sara, the social services decided that the person who had, and there were accusations against the father as well, so he couldn't be trusted to provide supervision at these meetings, but the stepmother somehow managed to persuade and ingratiate to a degree where she was charged with overseeing the visits by the mother to the child. She, and I don't know how across this you are, but she was effectively married at one point to 3 different men. So her powers of deception and manipulation seem to be incredible, where he just seems to be a thug. He just seems to be an ignorant thug with a great capacity for self-pity and lying. She appears to be capable of constructing entire imaginary universes. One friend reported that she adopted the persona of a very, very wealthy person after one of her marriages. Another of her marriages involved the groom being sent to prison for heroin smuggling. So the idea that she, and when I say marriages, I'm talking about the religious ceremony that hasn't been recognised in law. And that, I think, is part of the answer. You can't do things like this. You remember when Peter Connolly was killed, and there were stories about how his mother had smeared. Oh, I can't. Some days, eh? Some days. His mother had smeared chocolate spread around his mouth or something like that so that they couldn't see the bruises. What are you going to do if you're the social worker? Couldn't see the black eye because he'd got Nutella under his brow or something. I think I've remembered that correctly. What are you going to do? You're going to come in and wash his face? You're going to come in and demand that she cleans him up so you can... I mean, I don't know. I'm afraid that's the answer to this. 11 minutes after 10 is the time. So I fully appreciate that some people will be able to... what's the word I want? Understand this better than others. The closer you are to this sort of story, that figure of 480, I think, is leavening, isn't it? It leavens the horror slightly because you realise that this is actually happening. Something similar is happening every day. 480 children in England alone last year seriously harmed or killed as a consequence of abuse or neglect. So some people will be closer to this than we are. Some of us will hope to continue living our lives a million miles away from this kind of thing. Some people will know that it happened next door or on the next street, or you'll remember the name of the child that you subsequently discovered you'd been at school with who was having an absolute nightmare of a life. And who should have done something? Do you remember the little boy who was eating food out of the bin at school? Do you remember that story? And the teachers knew it, but there wasn't anything that the teachers could do except give him some food. He was being starved at home. You've got the, I think that was Daniel Pelka, wasn't it? The details begin to merge after a while, and you struggle to remember which horrors are specific to which child, as opposed to a sort of combination of catastrophe. So while I appreciate that some people will be closer to these sort of stories than I am, I have to cover them. I don't have to live them. Although sometimes that line can feel a bit perforated, can't it? I also think that we all get to answer this question. I think there was a time when I'd sort of try and open a show like this one by talking about how we are all somehow to blame. But, all of us are constantly trying to be better, aren't we? Trying to do better, trying to be better. And I think that was probably a bit lazy and performative, to be honest with you. We are all to blame. We all bear responsibility. We all looked the other way. Powerful, right? Arresting. Good radio. But not true, really. 2 people are responsible for her death. 3 if you include the uncle who faced slightly different charges. Multiple unexplained fractures. That wasn't social services or teachers or the police or you or me or anyone or the next door neighbours. 25 different locations. Experts describe multiple episodes of blunt force trauma. He would batter her with a cricket bat, and he did so for years. Surrey Social Services, the police, I must have had files the size of a small coffee table on Sara Sharif, the father of Sara. The school made a referral to social services 5 months before her death, but the case was closed within days. And if there are any recurring themes, in these stories, I think it's the manipulation, the hiding of the horrors. I wonder if the stepmother hadn't been so adept at that, whether the tragedy would have unfolded in the way that it did. Because Sara Sharif, and forgive me for being a bit unprofessional, he strikes me as being far too thick to have covered this up by himself. It's the chocolate spread syndrome, isn't it? It's the idea that you are working really hard to keep the truth away from the people who need to see it to save a child. So how does it happen? That's all. And it's not about pointing fingers of blame today. I'm saying it's not necessarily about pointing fingers of blame. If you, with your experience, insights, understanding, if you think there are cases here for culpability beyond the people ultimately responsible for the poor girl's death, then tell me. But I think all of us, even if you live your life a million miles away from this sort of tragedy, all of us have to have a view on this. How does it happen? It's not unique to modernity. It's not a consequence of an increasingly atomized society or the internet, but how does it happen? How does it happen? How do you get a handle on the banality of evil on a day like this? 0345 6060 973. How does it happen? Any answer you want. And be sensitive, but don't be shy. So the fact that homeschooling is increasingly popular, some experts are already suggesting it's a little bit too easy for parents to take their children out of school. That might be a post-COVID consequence. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud, and I'm inviting you to do the same. If you needed to explain to somebody who is a little bit naive, perhaps, not very news literate, someone who would never in a million years have imagined that 480 children in England could die or be seriously harmed by abuse or neglect in a single year, someone whose worldview is based almost entirely upon the relatively small pool of personal experience. I have never encountered anything like this, therefore it's probably not happening. That to me is forgivable, even enviable. But how do you explain to them how a story like this can occur? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. And finally, before I throw open the phone lines, I wonder, and the reason I said it's not a consequence of modernity, and it was happening 10 years ago, it was happening 20 years ago, it was happening in the case of Peter Connolly under the last Labour government, but if you work in the sector, then I wonder whether this is the 3rd day running when we're talking about something in the country, or the 4th day running when we're talking about something in the country that feels as if it's broken, and then the simplest scratch of the surface reveals that a lot of the damage can be traced back to cuts passed off as necessary consequences of austerity. Because it's all about the safety nets, isn't it? What were we talking about yesterday? We were just talking about people falling through the safety nets, and then they will end up either in A&E or in prison. And, these are safety nets that politicians have routinely punched holes in over the last 20 years, not just the last 14. You could go back to some of the things that New Labour did. So I don't know how political it is. 18 after 10 is the time. I'm going to open the phone lines now, but all I want you to do is answer the question of how, given your thoughts or your experiences, you don't, as I say, need to have any investment in tragedies like this to have an interesting view on how it happens. 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
21 minutes after 10. And how can this happen? I don't know, but some people will have more valuable insights than I can muster up this morning. How can a little girl like Sara Sharif be permitted to slip through so many nets so many times? Jane's in Fleet. Jane, what would you like to say?
Oh, good morning, James.
Hello.
It's my first time calling, so I'm slightly nervous.
Well, I'm sorry that it's such a sad day.
Indeed. I am a foster carer,
Okay.
and I exclusively do parent and child placement, so it's usually mums and newborn babies that come to me. And I just wanted to give a small insight into how difficult it is to pass information on and to be taken seriously.
Thank you.
I had a mum with me who was with me for 7 months over COVID. She did very well. She had a long-standing Class A drug addiction and had recovered enough to be given a chance. She'd already lost several children to the adoption system. And she came to me, she did very well, and then she moved into her own housing. I suspected further down the line, because I still had contact with her, I suspected that she was using again. This slippery slope had started. She was asking me for money. Right. She was refusing to open the door. Other people, neighbours, were reporting that they didn't see the child, or they heard a lot of crying. And I called social services and I said, I'm the person in this county, because this was an out-of-county placement, who knows this person best. And I can tell you with my hand on my heart, she is using again. And they said to me, have you seen her using? And I said, no, she's not that stupid. There's absolutely no way she would take drugs in front of me. Plus, she's not letting me in anymore. And they just said, there's nothing we can do. And
what do you think they could have done? I don't know what
they could have done unannounced visits. They could have asked the police to do a welfare
Does she have
check.
to let them in?
It depends.
Because this is what I mean about the recurring theme, the bit that possibly is simultaneously present in almost all of these stories and a little bit overlooked is the cleverness, for want of a better word, of the parent who is trying to avoid precisely the measures you describe.
Yes, I recall suggesting them at the time that they get the police to do a welfare check, a safe and well check, in the evening or really in the morning, and see what sort of state the house is in, how the child's sleeping. Is that
because there's no suggestion apart from the drug taking that is that a thing that the police do? Because they're not really. I often hear people moaning about the police not trying to solve crimes and being too busy doing other things, and that you could, if you were of a cynical worldview, file this under, well, that's not what the police should be doing.
Well, I know such a thing exists,
right? But
in my experience, and all the people I've looked after, nobody's ever had one. I don't know anyone who's ever had a safe and well check in these circumstances.
No.
So it could have been an opportunity for intervention. In the event, 6 weeks later, there was a hospitalisation. Child never left hospital, into mum's care, went straight into foster care.
And that's neglect rather than abuse. I know that the line is thin, but it was her drug addiction and her drug use that led to the child not being cared for. She wasn't, I don't think, beating the child up in the way that Sara Sharif did.
It would have been neglect.
Cunning is the word I'm looking for, isn't it?
The potential for abuse from other people coming into the house. Neighbours had complained that, there were strangers coming to the door frequently, staying a while, going again. So it's the exposure to the whole drug culture that bothered me. And this little boy had such a good start in life, and then he was taken into care, and who knows where he is now. So that's all I wanted to say.
I know, and it's a powerful picture that you paint. Although, of course, as you well know, it leaves as many questions hanging as it solves. I mean, could the police have done that? Do they have the right to make a forceful entrance? Who gets to ask for a welfare check? I mean, you could be used maliciously. You could be reporting erroneously to the police that some neighbour you don't like is up to no. I'm not looking for excuses. I'm looking for explanations. I mean, specifically, a member of the public or an organisation can be sufficiently worried about a person and report to the police a genuine, immediate and justifiable concern for the welfare or the well-being of somebody, and the police can then go to your home or a public space to check that you are safe and well. That's a safe and well rather than a welfare check. Well, they can be called both things, but I don't know how that works. Perhaps a police officer can tell us how feasible that is in the kind of context where mum opens the door and says, "No, we're fine, thanks, off you go, cheers." What busybody's been reporting me again? I'm just thinking about where the cunning would take you on a tale like this. Thank you, Jane. Phone lines are open, 0345 6060973. Of course, neglect is abuse. I'm pointing out that they are different forms of abuse. Neglect is a sort of dereliction, a delinquency of duty, whereas the abuse that Sara Sharif suffered from was violence and assault, violent attacks, torture. So they're two very different things. But of course, to suggest that neglect is not abuse would be silly. Rachel's in Tunbridge Wells. Rachel, what would you like to say?
Well, I work with young people as an art psychotherapist, and I often find that there's nowhere to submit further referrals to.
Yes.
For example, when we contact the local authority, their early help plan doesn't go anywhere, or somehow family manage to move it on, or if there's a multi-agency safeguarding referral made, that doesn't go anywhere. And I find it's very much systemic. The work is around family, not necessarily around the child that I'm working with. And there is no specialist trauma for young people who have experienced serious domestic abuse, horrific safeguarding issues, looked after children. So there's a massive hole, and school counselling doesn't cover it. It's a plaster. It's very good for some things, but obviously anything of a serious nature, it's not good enough.
And that's a sort of systemic inadequacy, or almost more than failure. Some elements of this story beg a belief, don't they? The idea that the child was placed with her mum after allegations were made against the dad in 2015, and then by 2019 he gets full custody after abuse allegations were made against the mother.
Yeah, it's absolutely horrific.
I mean, that's extraordinary that both parents face abuse allegations and the little girl shuttlecocks between them according to whose allegations are, I don't know, most current or loudest. Is there, do you think, you might not want to answer this question, but as an adopted person who's sort of very conscious of how that world has changed over the years, is a little bit too much stress placed on trying to keep everyone together sometimes? Is that what you mean when you say it's about the family rather than the child?
Well, the onus is on fixing the child,
yes.
But actually it's about the extended family and sometimes the parenting. So the parents aren't always to blame. That's not what I'm saying, but actually it's a family issue as opposed to one child as a scapegoat to fix the problem. And I'm talking about in serious cases as opposed to somebody who's struggling with anxiety or low mood or, having general mental health problems. I'm talking about something that's on a much more serious level that isn't recognised as something that needs necessarily family intervention.
And if you were working with a child, and your fears were in that field that you've just described, and then you came into the school the following week and the head teacher told you that little boy is now being homeschooled, how worried would you be? And B, how easy would it be for the parents to do that?
Well, currently it seems to be quite easy for parents to homeschool their children. It seems to have been in the last, since I've come back at the beginning of term in September, it's increased dramatically. And we're actually monitoring it at work because the increase has been quite significant. And also, seeing a young person and trying to refer them on to specialist treatment or intervention, or actually get intervention that's not just for the child, is really, really difficult.
Yeah.
And quite often we see children being pushed around from pillar to post. It's obvious that they're extremely vulnerable, and we're not. Well,
it's caught in a pint pot territory again. Actually, there's no obvious parallels with the conversation we had yesterday about prison places, except that if you've got 100 places and 200 people who need one, then you don't need to be Carol Vorderman to do the arithmetic in that sort of case. And that is why children go unhelped, shall we say, and needs go unmet. I mean, the elements of this story that are perhaps a little closer to unique include this sort of catalogue of allegation and abuse that did not at any point... Well, it did. I mean, that's another weird element of it. She was taken into care. Sara was briefly taken into care because of the risks that she clearly faced. And yet, and that was in 2014 when her parents split up. But by January of 2015, she had been returned to his care. And I mean, I understand the prioritisation of family. You know, it's, well, our job is to try and get this family functional, to try and get this family working. But I wonder where that balance breaks. I wonder where a creditable desire to help families achieve a state of functionality, a state of safety, perhaps should be ignored in favour of prioritising the actual life, ultimately, and safety originally of the child at risk. 10:32 is the time. Jenny Barsby has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:36 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. And I don't think it's the time now, but certainly before Mystery Hour comes along at 12 o'clock, I promise to put a smile on your face, possibly by citing an idea that I never thought would occur to me. I think... I'm beginning to wonder whether Kemi Badenoch might be even more bonkers than Liz Truss. And there are words I never thought would pass my lips. I don't know if you've seen her intervention on the subject of sandwiches this morning, or indeed steak, but my goodness me, imagine an intervention from a senior politician that runs a very real risk of making Liz Truss look sane. I think that Mrs. Badenoch may have done that today, and I shall bring that to your attention a little later in the programme, because we continue for now to contemplate the catastrophe that was Sara Sharif's life, the tragedy that was her death, and the question that is always raised at times like this about how on earth it could happen. And I misspoke earlier. I don't really read the tabloids in the morning, but they are just sort of alluding to the fact in the Daily Mirror, for example, that the boss of social services in the area where Sara died received an OBE in the birthday honours list. This idea that our desperation for vengeance, almost understandable desperation of vengeance, sees a slightly ignorant response sometimes. And I was right. It was Sharon Shoesmith who was in charge of social services when baby P died, and it was, I think, Ed Balls who responded to tabloid baying and tabloid howling by essentially facilitating her dismissal, and it was just shy of £680,000 that she subsequently received in compensation for unfair dismissal. So that was the story I was referring to earlier as a perfect illustration of what happens if you let the tabloid hounds set the narrative. But you can understand what they're feeding on, can't you? They're feeding on a desire to believe that this won't happen again, which is why we ask the question of how did it happen again? Steve's in Lincoln. Steve, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello,
I'd like
Steve.
to come at this from the perspective of the schools. I was a primary school teacher for many years, over 20 years.
Right.
I retired as a head teacher a couple of years ago. When I first started, it was safeguarding it played quite a minor role. We were literally told if you had any concerns, speak to the head teacher. very little training.
Right.
You acted on your intuition, basically, at the end of the day. And now we've got in a scenario where there's a massive role in safeguarding in schools. There's training at the beginning of the year. There's continuous training throughout the year. So how does this all happen? And for me, there's two main reasons, and I think they're interlinked as well. And what I saw over this time during my career was that the funding decreased in social services and in schools directly as a result of austerity. There was increased demand, which was actually linked to the austerity in the first place. And social care was less and less able to cope with that demand. And more emphasis was put on the schools to put things into place which they didn't have the resources to do. And that's the sad reality of it, really, for me.
Well, I'm never shy of parking responsibility for terrible things at the feet of austerity, but this isn't a new phenomenon, is it? I mean, a couple of cultural references that have popped into my inbox. There's the Brothers Karamazov has a tale of a child tortured by her parents, and Steve, like me, is obviously a Suzanne Vega fan, and there's a song called My Name is Luca that speaks of this sort of scenario in harrowing and heartbreaking terms. Peter Connolly was killed by his parents when Labour were in power, long before austerity, when austerity was just a gleam in George Osborne's eye. So I appreciate that you're talking from experience, but I don't know that the figures back up the theory, Steve.
No, but at the end of the day, I mean, there will always be cases, unfortunately, of child protection where, children do get harmed and, even more seriously, that's going to happen. But it's got worse and worse over the last few years.
It feels that way, doesn't it? We probably need to check the stats. So what would happen towards the end of your career if you saw a child coming to school, for example, covered in bruises? Because the school that Sara had attended reported the fact that she had come to school covered in bruises, and the response was correct. Social services, social services were called, but Surrey County Council decided to take no further action, and Sharif, the father, responded by taking the little girl out of school. So what can you do in that situation? You can't do any more than report it to social services, can you?
No, I mean, schools, people that work in schools, even, dinner ladies, for example, or dinner staff have got a legal obligation to report any concerns. And that system is very good in schools, I think, certainly the ones that I worked in. The problem is that once you report things, it's very difficult to get it past that first stage. And you are dealing with different social workers all the time. And I can't speak for Surrey County Council, but for my own local authority, 1 week you would deal with one social worker, the next week it would be somebody different. It was completely new to the case. You'd have to explain everything.
And that's no one's fault, is it? That's not the fault of any easily identifiable individual, but it is part of the story of how a horror show like this can unfold. That. And also, what can you do? What's that like? Did you ever have any cases that were really tough? Did you ever discover that some children...
I did. I had a family, the parents were drug users.
Right.
There was suspected incest going on within the family. We knew there were ongoing problems. Some of the family members were continuously in trouble with the police.
Right.
The social care went round. They found that the living room was flea infested, the sofa.
Yeah.
They gave funding to the family to buy a new sofa.
Right.
They gave them cash and they bought a telly instead.
Yeah.
So just basic things like that, and it was
I was drawn to the idea of your impotence as a teacher, because you know that child is going home to a horror show, and that what can you actually do apart from go quietly mad with despair? You rarely meet a small child who's not lovely, do you? I know some of them can be tricky and mischievous and naughty and annoying, but usually a small child is a bubble of innocence and often a bubble of joy. Even if they've got horrible things going on in their life, they manage to find the joy in the tiniest moments, and then to send them home to horror must be awful. Must be absolutely awful.
Yeah, it is heartbreaking.
And what else? That's what the point I'm making in probably an inappropriately sort of sentimental way is, what can you do? You can't go home. You can't adopt the child. You can't abduct the child. You can't save the child. It's one of my favourite book of all time, The Catcher in the Rye, which is based on a misunderstanding of a Robbie Burns poem. The actual poem goes, if a body meet a body, coming through the rye, but he thinks the hero of the book thinks it's if a body catch a body, and he just had this idea that when he'd grow up he'd guard a cliff edge where children were playing in wheat fields. Oh Lord, I just made you think of Theresa May, didn't I? Where children were playing in fields, and his job would be to catch the children, to stop them falling off the cliff. But you can't do that in real life. You can't do that if you're a teacher. Can you do it if you're a social worker? I don't know. I hope so, but clearly, 480 children in England alone last year fell off that cliff. Some of them died, some of them were seriously injured. All of them were victims of abuse and neglect. 0345 60 60973 is the number you need if you want to add to this list of answers to the question of how can it happen. Because I think there's an elephant in the room, isn't there? You're never going to stop it completely. It's impossible to stop it completely. There will always be a mother or a father or a step-parent who is so cunning. It's the same as abuse, sexual abuse. There will always be an adult so cunning that child cannot be saved and cannot be protected. That's, I think, the elephant in the room, isn't it? That the idea that this can be some sort of zero-sum game. If we tweak that and do that and spend this and spend that, hire them and fire them, then this would never, ever happen again. But it would.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:47 is the time. I wonder how would you even know what the inevitable figure is? The idea that you're never going to be able to turn child abuse or even child killing into a zero-sum game. You're never going to reduce it to zero. There will always be an adult cunning enough to evade detection. And until the child is dead. And what would the figure be? What would the bottom line figure be on the inevitability scale? We'll never know. But I think it's important to acknowledge that it exists. Jack's in Climping. Jack, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
Personal caller, so please go.
Well, I'm not. I can't imagine any circumstances at the moment in which I'm going to tear a caller to this particular programme a new one, Jack. But but here we are. Go on.
Big fan. Just wanted to call to say really that I think this is solvable. I think due to the funding cuts to the police and social services since Theresa May's wonderful government, there isn't the money there. I was a police officer for a few years and had to take some children into police custody. And once you've got them, you pass them to social services. That's all you can do. And I just think that there needs to be a separate task force that's funded by the government, funded by the NSPC perhaps as well, so they can, collaborate and actually take these children into custody, and don't give them back until you're satisfied that they're safe.
That's the element of this story that I think a lot of people will be goggle-eyed at. The way that she was moved from pillar to post, or literally from mother to father to mother, and yet the risks to her were clear, and the consequences of the abuse were visible. The school was reporting the bruises. So what do you do when you were a police officer? You'd take a child into protection, I think, very rarely.
Very, very rarely. If that child's safety and you fear that the parent isn't capable of keeping them safe, you take them into police protection, but that only lasts as long as you can call social services to get them to come and take the child. So, my whole thought process is if the NSPCC, the government, were to fund a task force that say, train the police officers more. If you fear that the child is in fear, or
a new gear, a new button that you press that activates a new body of people, and that would take a lot of money. And politicians today will be talking about lessons being learned, but in a week it will be forgotten, and in 6 months there'll be another story like this one that comes along. You provide the perfect counter, Jack. The phone line's gone a bit south, so I'll move on and look forward to you calling me on a happier day. But you provide a counterpoint to my bleak image of inevitability, and you don't remove it. There'll always be a figure that couldn't be avoided, whatever people did. But there is a strong sense that the figure should be a lot lower than it is, and that in this particular tragedy, a tragedy of Sara, that it could have been averted or avoided. 10 to 11 is the time. Staying with the police briefly before we go to Maria, who's in Liverpool. Peter's been in touch, who's ex-DCI, big contributor to LBC. Police have no power to insist on entry or even on the door being opened or on seeing the child. This is what I feared when we were talking about welfare checks earlier. If they do the very best they could do would be to be on that red alert for any other signs of concern, which then, as our last caller just told us, you could report to social services as intelligence to add to a bigger picture. It's a blind spot in the child protection system. Two ex-coppers making a very similar point there about a blind spot in the child protection system. And Peter adds, maybe there is scope for a new power for courts to order a right of access, etc., in cases of concern, so that social services and or police can check properly when concerns arise. And, you sort of think about, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to say vigilante, but you'd almost want the local council to have a department that was dedicated to children at risk, like really driven individuals who saw their job to save the children as opposed to help the family. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud about how these cases occur. Most of the work that social services do is going to be dedicated to helping a family get through a difficult time, deal with trauma, deal with difficulty, manage addiction, whatever it may be. Some children cross a threshold when the priority should simply be to get them the heck out of there. And that doesn't seem to exist. Maria is in Liverpool. Maria, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Maria.
Just to make a couple of points. The first point, on the number of children harmed or killed.
Yes.
That figure has remained the same for at least 12 years.
Right.
Louise Tickle did a programme on this a couple of years ago. And of those almost 500 children every year for the past 12 years that have been harmed or killed, 5%, 10% were involved with social services.
Only?
So, yeah.
Gosh.
So that means over the last 10 years, all the children that have been taken into care for serious neglect or serious abuse, they've missed the ones who have been abused. So you've got to ask, because the figure, say, 10 years ago was approximately 55,000 children at one time in the system.
Yeah.
Now the figure is 107,000 children. The problem is they're taking the wrong children into care.
How do you know? Do you work in the sector?
No, I support women who've had their children taken. And across all forums that I deal with, there must be about 15,000 women, mothers, fathers, grandmothers, grandfathers.
Yeah.
And I have heard, I would say, about 10,000 stories, James. And
of people having a child taken away who you don't feel should have been taken away.
Yes, exactly.
Because no parent ever welcomes it, do they? No parent ever says, it's a fair cop, you better take him.
No, some of them do.
I know, but I'm just saying that the general experience will be that it's unfair when a child is taken away.
No, the general experience, first of all, before I answer that question, there's two kinds of social workers. There's the excellent social worker, and we've had feedback on that as well, where they have intervened, they've helped, they've provided money for courses, for therapy, for mental health.
Yes.
They've helped women get away from an abusive partner, because the main reason these children from these 10,000 stories I've heard are taken is because of domestic abuse, violence of the man. But this new training, it must be new training that's come in, is blaming the woman. The woman is not able to keep the child safe, therefore she is the problem. And the reason you don't hear about this, and this poor child was given to her father, that's absolutely normal in the secret courts. That is absolutely normal. Because they do not recognise rape, they don't recognise domestic violence, they don't recognise coercive control. These so-called judges have no idea how these women live. They go by reports from social services. So we'll never get to the bottom of what happened to Sarah, because that's all secret.
Okay, well, I mean, we know an awful lot We know that the dad was arrested on 3 separate occasions for 3 separate alleged crimes, but no charges were brought. We know that Sara made allegations of abuse against her own mother, which was why she was put into the care of her father, despite concerns about his conduct and history. We know that the authorities, whether it's I don't know why you say so-called judges, they are judges, whether the judges fell for the act of the stepmother, but she was believed to be a civilising influence on the father and part of the reason why they were able to return Sara to their care. We know that the school referred bruising on her chin and a dark mark on her right eye to social services. We know that Surrey County Council decided to take no further action, and we know that she was actually taken into foster care back in 2014 when the couple originally split up. But I take your point, and I suppose it's a counterintuitive position on a morning like this one to think that too many children are taken into care when this conversation is about how the hell was this child allowed to stay with her parents. But the two things can be true at the same time, even if they seem outwardly contradictory. And if Maria is right, then one reason why children who should be taken away from their parents are not is because the spaces are filled by children who she contends should not have been taken away from their children in the first place. But they're not taken away from mothers and fathers, they're taken out of dangerous situations. That would be my only quibble with your analysis, albeit that you're much more qualified than me to provide it. It doesn't really matter who's responsible for the horror. It's the horror that prompts the removal, I think. Ed's in Lambeth. Ed, what would you like to say?
Hi, yeah, thanks, James.
Hey.
For me, I'm a qualified social worker. I'm still registered as a social worker. And my view is that what we desperately need is a child protection authority. This is, I believe, one of the recommendations that Baroness J came up with in her IICSA report in 2020, amongst many others. And I think that child protection authority would have the ability to bring all the components of local authority services together to make sure that, as you were saying, social workers should reasonably be supporting families.
Yes,
but we should also be never forgetting that our duty is to safeguard the child. And you
feel that's absent?
That was the lesson of Baby Peter. The social workers were focusing too much on supporting the family and not recognising the child was seriously suffering. I think that I would like to push back, if I may, though, on a point that you said earlier on about sort of austerity not being to blame. And I fully agree with your kind of argument that, it's just too easy to turn around and say that austerity is to blame. But there have been, in the last 15 years, a substantial drop in standards.
Right.
And these can be seen, for example, like, we used to have serious case reviews. Serious case reviews had to occur under certain circumstances. They've now been replaced by safeguarding practice reviews that don't necessarily have quite the same remit. And for me, I'll just rather open a conversation out. Do you know, if I asked you the question of, do you know who Morning Lane are? Is that a group or a name that you recognise?
No.
Okay, well, in 2012, legislation was introduced that took Ofsted's responsibility for children's social care and placed it with an external group called Morning Lane.
Right.
And it's a fact that most people don't know this. Morning Lane were the ones who would come in and oversee audits of local authorities. And that has, I think, created a really significant culture that where even if social workers are in a position where they are wanting to raise concerns, it now is very unclear what steps we should be taking in the event that we have something that is concerning us and we don't know how to address it.
And that's probably the theme that has popped up most often in the course of this morning's contributions from people who are in or have been in the various sectors that are relevant to this conversation about Sara Sharif. The idea that there's something missing in the public provision of care and concern, like a kind of a wing of social services or a separate entity that is dedicated to something different from what is done by the workers who are in the space already. So the police calling for something different, social workers calling for something different, a child protection unit. I've read most of Baroness J's report, but as you point out, not for a while. So I think you're right that it was something that mandatory reporting was something else that would be relevant to this conversation. The idea that there is a legal requirement for reporting suspicion and or certainly evidence of abuse, but of course in this case it was reported, and it wasn't enough. Thank you to everybody who contributed to that hour. As I think you can tell sometimes, some conversations I really don't find easy to conduct, but that can never become a reason not to conduct them, can it? It's 11:01.
James O'Brien on LBC.
4 minutes after 11 is the time. Thursday, Mystery Hour on the way. We may be hearing from a great friend of the programme in the course of this hour, someone we heard from earlier this week on Monday in the context of the situation in Syria. But I think he's managed to get there. So we will hopefully be making contact with him, albeit that it is obviously a little bit difficult for me to guarantee. Mystery Hour, I can't even guarantee Mystery Hour either. I could have dropped it last week so that we could get stuck into Keir Starmer's speech a little. I kind of wanted to. I felt that speech by Starmer last week was worthy of a phone-in of its own. I knew Sheila would come along and do it, but I didn't. I did Mystery Hour, and thank goodness I did, because Ian stopped me outside the coffee shop that I like to attend most mornings to lean out of his ice cream van and called how relieved he was that we hadn't called off Mystery Hour. So I'm always putting the listeners first. It's it's a burden that I bear. 5 minutes after 11 is the time. How long have you been listening to this programme? I don't say an hour and 5 minutes. I mean, in terms of months or years. How long have you been listening to this programme? If I were to say to you that there are a couple of topics that used to come around with unerring regularity and hardly do any more, I may even open up the inbox on this one. What would you put on that list? And I'll give you a couple more clues. Something where my opinions were really informed by my experiences, which is not always the case. You're not, and remember, I'm saying it doesn't come around much anymore. So you can't go for class or education or any of the hardy perennials with which I find myself enduringly fascinated. Well, topics that we used to wade into with a real regularity that we hardly ever go near now. Do you know what, Davey? You're right, Brexit. But that wasn't what I had in mind. I kind of mean almost in the pre-Brexit days, in the days when we were not living in a country that had become the first in the history of humanity to actually vote en masse to impose economic sanctions on its own citizens. Oh, I like that. Obi, you clearly have been listening for a long time. Rats. I used to be obsessed with rats. I don't know. Well, I do know why. I had a kind of phobia and other things. No, we still do obesity a lot. We've never done phone-ins on Kidderminster Des, and I've never done motoring topics or parking tickets. Stop being hilarious. No one's getting it right. I used to do it a lot, and it had a very personal resonance for me, for reasons. Not tattoos, not menswear. I did phone-ins on tattoos, actually. Yeah, that works, but it's not that, Matt. I never did phone-ins on menswear, Les, and I've already said it wasn't Brexit. Cannabis. How can you not have guessed? How could you not have got that? We used to do loads of phone-ins about cannabis for a number of reasons. Chief among them being that cannabis use kind of ruined my life as a younger man. Not the cannabis itself, but the laws surrounding it. It is why I was expelled from school in the Easter holidays before my final term. There it is. Ross has come in with drugs just a moment before I actually said it out loud. And lots of you coming up with cauliflowers. Good Lord, rapping. That is old school. Eleanor produces this programme and she was unaware of my brief foray into drum and bass performing. She'd never heard of it or seen it before, which means two things. Number one, she's very young, but also number two, I obviously never mention it anymore. I used to mention that a lot. I recorded a drum and bass track. It's really good. You can find it on YouTube if you don't believe me. So we used to. So there are lots of things we used to talk about a lot more than we do now. And it's not the Battle of the Somme, Adam, but well played. It's cannabis, and the reason why I found it fascinating, and I had very pungent views, if you pardon the pun, was because if I had not been from the kind of background that I'm from, then the trouble I got into at the age of 18 would have been life-changing. It was life-changing in the short term. You don't get second chances if you are not born into a modicum of privilege, a modicum of entitlement. You mess up once, you get into trouble with the police once, and things get taken away from you. My life got kind of just set back a bit, and it was more the heartbreak that I brought to my parents by being very publicly expelled from a school that they had scrimped and saved to send me to, that had an emotional impact on me that I think, looking back, really informed my attitude to cannabis laws. So I was always very much in favour of legalisation, in favour of decriminalisation, because the damage done by the criminalisation was so acute. And that was something that, for once, I truly knew from personal experience. And I think I was probably at my worst when I was dismissing concerns about psychosis. There is some scientific evidence that much of the claims about new strains, commonly known as skunk, being much more responsible for psychosis than previous strains, and what you are smoking now being almost unrecognisable when compared to what was being smoked in the 60s or even the 80s. I was contemptuous and dismissive of that because I was so committed to the notion of legalisation and decriminalisation, and I was clearly wrong. In fact, this is quite a new area of wrongness for me. It's an area of wrongness I've arrived at since I wrote a book called How Not to Be Wrong, which is full of things I had previously been wrong about. But I was obviously wrong about this. Elton John has waded into the conversation today, talking about how it is addictive and it does lead to other drugs. So I would also be dismissive of the gateway drug argument. I'm very dismissive of it. The idea that if you start off with cannabis, then this time next year you will be addicted to crack cocaine. It's that song, isn't it? There's a Prince song about in January he tried reefer for the very first time. Now he's doing horse. It's June. So, you know, people like Prince and Elton John arguably know what they're talking about in these sort of fields. Elton John, of course, has talked a lot about addiction. He's described the legalization of marijuana in parts of North America as one of the greatest mistakes of all time. He's been sober himself for 34 years. He's helped fellow celebrities, including Eminem and Robbie Williams, to recover from their addictions. And they've just made him Time magazine's Icon of the Year. And he's taken the opportunity to describe marijuana as addictive and to explain that the reason why it leads to other drugs is because when you're stoned, and he adds, I've been stoned, you don't think normally. Legalizing marijuana in America and Canada is one of the greatest mistakes of all time. And then another story in the news today sees the head of the only NHS clinic treating psychosis in cannabis users calling for more specialist centres to open up, as she revealed that she is turning away patients on a daily basis. So this is the NHS Cannabis Clinic for Psychosis in London. And the professor who heads it up, Marta DeForti, has said that she has no doubt more clinics are needed after fielding calls from colleagues around the country asking for help. This comes as research at another clinic, research at this clinic showed it to offer a feasible and effective treatment strategy to help young and adult cannabis users to significantly cut down and even stop smoking the drug. So it's a bit of a mea culpa, this. I'm not sure that I'm ready yet to sign myself up as an opponent of decriminalisation or legalisation, although I'm happy to acknowledge Sir Elton John's qualifications in this field. I don't think you ban something because a tiny number of people that use it have problems. Although, that said, I think if alcohol was invented today, it would probably be prohibited. If you started hearing stories about people who'd got hold of some and what happened when they did, you could imagine if alcohol was invented today from a standing start, from zero, right? It was invented today. What do you think the coverage would be like? It'd be like the coverage of Spice. It would. You'd be doing phone-ins saying, I saw some people, I think they'd been taking alcohol, James, and they were all shouting at each other and fighting, and some of them were giggling uncontrollably. One man wet himself, and another one fell asleep in a flower pot. That was me once, actually, but that's a story for a different day. Do you see what I mean? If alcohol was invented today, it would probably be prohibited, but it isn't, so it's there. And it adds to the idea of something that has a terribly deleterious effect on some people. Shouldn't necessarily be grounds for it being criminalised and rendered illegal for all people. But 14 minutes after 11 is the time. I don't think that I was right in the past when I poo-pooed concerns about cannabis having a very negative impact on people, when I dismissed claims that it was a gateway drug, and when I wholeheartedly and full-throatedly called for its decriminalisation. how hard is it to give up? 0345 6060 973. How bad an impact has it had on your life? Have you gone from being where I was 10 years ago, absolutely adamant that it was fine, it was even a force for good, and this has to be through the lens of personal experience, this bit. I think it does. It has to be a journey that you have been on, from habitual cannabis use to no cannabis use, via the enormous difficulty of knocking it on the head. I remember when I finally gave it up, I found it much, much easier than I ever would have imagined, largely because it turned out I hadn't developed an addiction to nicotine, which was an absolute miracle in the circumstances. But the first side effect I noticed was my dreams. My dreams suddenly became so much more clear. You'd think it'd be the other way around, wouldn't you? I have a relatively minor point, but I didn't struggle particularly, just sort of ceased to be of interest to me. However, I know people who have struggled and who can't give it up. But what I've never done before is properly acknowledge how much damage it can do. I don't want this to be a skewed conversation. I want you to ring in and tell me I'm being a right old wombat. And don't ring in and say, you've changed, James. It's good to change, right? You move with the times. When your facts change, you change your mind. If you don't, there's no point having one, as a very wise man once wrote. But you have, Edward de Bono, not me, you have this idea in your head, in your 20s, your 30s, even your 40s, that this is not only harmless, but it's actually beneficial. It's a force for good. And then life happens, you move on, you leave it behind, and you realise that, do you know what? I wish I'd never tried it in the first place. Part of this is linked to my children, actually. Children reach an age where they could be getting into this stuff, and you'd previously thought, well, it didn't do me any harm. And then you notice that you're actually quite relieved that they're not getting into this stuff, and you find yourself wondering why. Why would I be relieved that my children aren't getting into something that I've argued is not only harmless, but is also beneficial? Why would I be relieved that they're not doing something I've previously defended? And if you start asking yourself questions like that, you come to the point where you wonder whether you need to give your head a bit of a wobble and rethink not necessarily the whole issue, but certainly acknowledge arguments that you previously were a little bit arrogant about. I'm talking about me now, not you. I was previously very arrogant and very adamant. Arrogant and adamant. On this issue, when I'm thinking, certainly if someone like Elton John can come out the other side and change his view completely, then I think we probably all have to contemplate whether or not we should too. So, how bad is it? You now realise. 0345 6060 973 with of course a constant invitation to ring in and tell me that it's not bad at all. But I just wonder whether you've done this thing where you've gone from absolutely harmless, couldn't live without it, love it, everyone should do it, to thinking, do you know what, now that I've knocked it on the head, I realise that ... And the dots are there because I don't want to put words in your mouth. 0345 6060 973. Two stories. Elton John legalising cannabis, one of the greatest mistakes of all time. So I suppose I'm asking whether you have undergone a complete reversal of opinion on the issue of cannabis. And the second story, cannabis users need more help from the NHS to quit the drug. How hard is it to quit? 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
20 minutes after 11, you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's a tough one because I will keep saying that negative experiences by a relatively small minority should not be grounds for denying something to an enormous majority. But something about Elton John this morning just made me give my head a minor wobble. I may unwobble it later and return to my previous position of adamance and arrogance with regards to the necessity of decriminalising and legalising cannabis in this country. This is interesting, though. Anonymous, please. Remember, always put that at the top. If you put it at the bottom, I may not notice it until I've read out the message. I used to be addicted to cannabis for 20 years. I lost a lot of my life because of it. It sucks away your motivation. It makes you lazy and sleepy. My house was a mess. I quit in 2012 and I never looked back. Back when I smoked it, I was a huge campaigner for legalisation. I used to visit Amsterdam and all the rest of it. But now I'm against it because it will lead more people to try it, and that means many will end up like I did. I don't know. Mike's in Liverpool. Mike, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
Mike. Basically, my sort of journey from is kind of similar to that. I come from a very good family, but I started taking drugs at a very young age, 12, 13.
Right.
And then, cannabis was a main part of that. But absolutely, when I was younger, even as a young adult, I thought it was, great, fine, power to the people, etc. Yes. However, since I've grown up and now I look back at my life, how I developed, I was out of school very early, in and out of criminal justice system. We went on to other drugs. Some of my friends that we smoked with are now on heroin. Some of them are dead, and so the impact can be significant. And I think, if I can just say one thing, I think we have to have a serious conversation about the change of cannabis, okay? Because it's in my older life, I worked in hostels. I now run a charity that supports people with ADHD and mental health.
Yes.
I've seen young people pass out. I've seen one young man, a bit anecdotal, I know, but one young man passed out because he hadn't eaten for 3 days because he was saving up his money and spending all his money trying to get cannabis. The strength of the cannabis nowadays, because it is dopamine, it does work with your dopamine, which is how we form a lot of addictive or habitual behaviours. I'm seeing behaviours that you wouldn't normally associate with, casual cannabis use anymore.
What?
Well, exactly that. What kind of person doesn't eat for 3 days so they can keep buying cannabis?
I'm not claiming it's commonplace, but it wouldn't have been unknown when I was at college.
Sure.
I don't think it's unique or it's like. So have you given everything up now? You completely.
Yeah, I have now. I've had to. Because my health and my family and things like that.
What I wonder about is the relationship between. So the massive majority of people who just like a smoke, or they ingest it in other ways, and who can argue very persuasively that it is a force for good in their life, including people with ADHD. Quite a lot of my messages are coming in, including people who, I mean, self-medication is a thing, whether we approve of it or not. So how confident can we be that the horror stories justify the criminalisation of the massive majority of users who are never going to go down any of the roads that you've just described? That's the problem.
No, absolutely.
He had a whitey, the lad you'll require. That's what we used to call a whitey, and there is.
No, James. Believe me, I understand whiteys. No, this was general personal neglect, and this is something we see. And I think absolutely. It's not a problem for everyone. However, as your previous message said,
yes.
There is something about motivation, productivity, development. I don't technically know who I could be if I started taking drugs at 12, not just
the path not taken. Who would you be today if you hadn't gone down that road? And that thing about productivity, motivation. I heard someone once said, the problem with cannabis is it makes you okay with being bored. Yeah.
And that is the challenge, because boredom creates initiative, creates drive, doesn't it? We don't like being bored.
Okay, what's worse then, cannabis or smartphones? I'm reading today about teenagers spending more time on their phones than they're spending in school. So what would you rather they did? You can do great art when you're stoned. People do great art. I don't want to name any names because I may have misremembered, but I'm pretty sure that one of my favourite authors writes high. He always has a smoke before he starts.
No, absolutely. And you know what? I think I'd fall with you on that. I think the smartphones would have to go, because I think they're absolute poison in terms of they just generally seem to be creating mental health challenges across the board. I see very few what I would call happy teenagers at the moment. And I don't
it's like a massive social experiment. And I wonder whether we could actually file skunk in particular, which I know you were alluding to earlier, the differences between that and what was around back in the day. As also a massive social experiment. But you're right, it's not either or. You can be disapproving of both. I've checked because I didn't want to say anything inappropriate, but Lee Child, who is responsible for the Jack Reacher novels, although his brother Andrew writes them now. It was him. I thought I didn't imagine this. I don't know if the story's moved on. This was in 2013. I've been smoking weed for 44 years, 5 nights a week. I'm the poster boy to prove it doesn't do you much harm. I've got a guy on speed dial in New York who comes over with a huge range of marijuana. I smoke it in a pipe because I've never been any good at rolling my own joint. So just as a counterpoint, I don't know whether he's changed his view subsequently or whether that line about it makes it okay being bored. You can take that either way. That's 52-48, isn't it? It's quite good to have something that makes boredom tolerable, makes boredom pleasant even. Or is it bad because it robs you of motivation? People who've been on journeys, that's what this hour is about. People who have changed their mind, or people who think that those who have changed their mind are ridiculous. Jason's in Hendon. James, I beg your pardon, is in Hendon. James, what would you like to say?
Hi, yeah, I'd just like to say that I've been on cannabis for a while. I've been free for it for a couple months now because I just realized it felt like it was way stronger than before, and I started getting these almost psychotic feelings of my mind was going in a loop, and I started feeling myself going crazy. But in the beginnings, when I first did it, it was with friends, and it was actually quite great. And it was only occasionally would do it. But then when COVID hit, I started feeling my mood going down. I got a bit depressed, and I kind of used it as a self-medication at that time. And then eventually it was just like, I only do it over the weekends. But eventually I was just doing it almost every day to cope with work as well. I work from home a lot. And I used it as a way to make that fun.
That makes perfect sense. It gives you a sort of accelerated relaxation as well. It's tying in with what the last caller said about boredom. You just sort of... You're in a slightly better space stoned than you were not stoned.
Yeah, and it's just...
Until you're not.
Yeah, and it's just like... I started eventually taking it every day, and it just set my baseline mood of requiring it to feel normal. So I wake up, and I just smoke weed, and it's just like, oh, what is this? And then eventually, I started getting these weird feelings. It's like I have taken mushrooms as well and LSD, but I'd only do that once a year.
Sure.
And I started getting these feelings from weed that it was almost like that, but way worse. And it just felt like I was going crazy.
What changes have you noticed since you knocked it on the head?
Oh, just my mood's better now. Just baseline. I'm a lot happier.
It's funny, isn't it? Because a lot of people are messaging me, including William, to say that it makes him happy. I've been smoking every day for 40 years.
It did for me. It made me happier. But then eventually, it's just like I needed it for everything. And when I didn't have it, when I was going to the office, I'm not going to go there stoned and stuff. It's just like I noticed that I was a lot more just in a worse mood.
Yeah, no, and also the addiction element, I think, is probably something that we overlook. Mr. P says, I've got friends who's clamouring for a spliff would raise a lot more eyebrows if it was alcohol. They'd be labelled alcoholic or functioning alcoholic if they were behaving in the same way. But because it's weed, it's slightly more socially acceptable, as alcohol once was. I wonder how old you are, Mr. P, because I don't know that would necessarily apply to my generation. I think that weed... Well, would it? I don't know. Around about early 30s, everyone sort of suddenly grew out of it. And of course, some didn't. And it became a little bit more stigmatised. Which is why I just wonder what age you are. Reese, thank you, James. Take care. Hang in there. Reese is in Cardiff. Reese, what made you pick up the phone? Oh, I'll find out after the very latest headlines with Jenny Barsby.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:31 is the time. I suppose we should acknowledge the munchies at this point in the conversation. Who do you think said this recently? Are you ready for this? What's a lunch break? Lunch is for wimps. I have food brought in, and I work and eat at the same time. There's no time. Sometimes I will get a steak. I'm not a sandwich person. I don't think sandwiches are a real food. It's what you have for breakfast. I will not touch bread if it's moist. Now, how would you feel if you overheard your doctor saying that? Oh, so you're waiting outside your lawyer's office. You've been falsely accused of a terrible crime and your future freedom relies upon their competence. And the door of the office is just cracked open and they're talking to a colleague and you hear them saying, I will not touch bread if it's moist. I don't believe in sandwiches. I don't think sandwiches are a real food. What would you do if you're waiting for surgery Or your mum's going in for surgery and the consultant's walking out the corridor and doesn't realise you're behind them, and you hear them saying, "Lunch is for wimps. I have food brought in and I work and eat at the same time." Admittedly tricky for a surgeon, I grant you. I mean, this bit here, "Sometimes I will get a steak." How can you work and eat at the same time if you're eating a steak? There are no more labour-intensive foods than a steak, unless it's sort of being cut into little pieces for you and put on cocktail sticks, I suppose. You could, but so, I mean, who do you think has said this stuff in public out loud? Shall I can't do it as a game because you probably already know, don't you? But I mean, goodness me, what absence of self-awareness would you need to think that this makes you sound tough, or this makes you say, steak. How do you eat steak at your desk while also working? Do you eat it like an apple? Do you pick it up like a lump of meat and take bites out of it and then put it back down and then go? Well, imagine the state of your keyboard if you're just picking up lumps of meat, taking a nibble, putting it back down. Otherwise, you of course you can't work and eat at the. That's literally what sandwiches are for. That's why sandwiches were invented, so that the Earl of Sandwich. I kid you not, all right? This isn't like the Earl of Dartmouth inventing darts. This story's true. The Earl of Sandwich didn't want to get up from the gaming table where he was gambling, so he instructed a factotum to bring him some meat wedged between two slices of bread, and lo and behold, the sandwich was invented. It's literally invented so that you could work and eat at the same time, but not for this person who is sometimes brought a step. I'm going to give you a clue. If you routinely found yourself in a position where you can tell people to bring you steak, "Bring me a steak," and make it snappy, "Bring me a steak," what social class would that make you immediately? How many times would you have to order a colleague to bring you a steak before you became a member of, I don't know what class it is, the stakeholder class? The steak class. Have you got it yet? That's the clue. So if you can do X and automatically become working class, what class do you become when you fall into the habit of ordering meat from bring me meat from colleagues, while also simultaneously insisting that you can't eat lunch because you have to work and eat at the same time? What's a lunch break? Lunch is for wimps. I have food brought in and I work and eat at the same time. There's no time. Sometimes I will get a steak. I'd love to see someone eating a steak at their desk. Wouldn't you? Just breathtaking. I'm not a sandwich person. I don't think sandwiches are a real food. It's what you have for I have to clarify something. The person responsible has made it clear in the past that they will not be lectured to by me. Personally, by name. They will not be lectured to by me. But seriously, is there nobody in Kemi Badenoch's office, for it is she, who ever says to her, "That's not a very good idea. I don't think you should do the steak material, Kemi"? You can imagine her looking at herself in the mirror in the mornings going, "I'm tough. Rawr. I eat meat. I eat steak. Sandwiches are for wet. Sandwiches are woke. A woke sandwich. I don't eat sandwiches. I eat meat at my desk while also working." How does this work? I do not know. Anyway, she's leader of the opposition. And this is an interview with her friend Michael Gove. Well, I say friend. I mean, he wrote it up. If he really liked her, he probably would have spiked it immediately and left it in the... well, where would you leave it? Oh, my days. And she said this stuff outside. So, are you the Queen of the Dragons? Asks Michael Gove. To which she responded by saying, "I strongly associated with Daenerys." Yes, is that how you pronounce it? The Game of Thrones person? No? Do we know Daenerys? I don't know. So she thinks, I'm not even exaggerating, she thinks she's in a character in Game of Thrones, eating meat at her desk while working. I've got a whole interview here. I was going to pick through it line by line looking for the favourites, but I don't know that I've got the... is anyone else beginning to feel a bit sorry for her? It started off hilarious. Here it is. "I'm also a Game of Thrones fan. The White Walkers are out there," she says, referring to the army of zombie creatures threatening mankind in the George R.R. Martin fantasy books. "Are you the Queen of the Dragons? I strongly associated with Daenerys." Yes. Well, anyway, there it is. If you know how to eat a steak at your desk while also working, you too can be leader of the opposition. 11:37 is the time. I tell you what, though, when she said she never makes gaffes, and she never has to apologise for anything or clarify what she meant. You can't argue with that, can you? Back to cannabis. Reese is in Cardiff. Reese, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James. I'm just going to put my steak sandwich down for 2 seconds.
No, not a steak sandwich, mate. It's a steak. It's a steak. Sandwiches are for wimps. Sandwiches are woke. You've got to have a steak. I want you to take a steak in your bloody hand, bite a chunk out of it, and then put it back down.
The bread goes to waste at this point.
Yes, carry on.
I was just following up because the conversation about the cannabis use is something I'm going through at the moment after using it yearly for a good 20-odd years and coming to the end of its life, if you like, and I've given up, and I've been about 8 or 9 weeks now where I haven't indulged in a spliff, and it was just something that rang true to me when you.
What difference is it making? Well, let's begin at the beginning. Why did you decide enough was enough?
Honestly, it does seem like a long time. The last 4 years, waking up each morning, telling myself, "You're not going to have a smoke tonight, Reece. Think about your health. You're not going to do it." And then as the working day goes on, you get home and you think, "Oh, well, one will do. That'll be fine." Yeah. Then you have the one. And it was just going through the cycle of continuously telling myself, "You'll give up 1 year or you'll give up 1 month." Or, and then it finally got to the end where I was fooling myself. And I think the realist, coming to that conclusion, I was like, no, you've got to do it for yourself a little bit, because, like I said, I really enjoy smoking weed. I think it's a brilliant drug. I'm not sure if I could say that out loud so freely. But it was the fact, the control it had over me, or the fact that I couldn't just say no to it at the end of the night.
That's an interesting thing. But that's been true for a very, very long time. Well, because you'd never really thought about knocking it on the head before. As soon as you think, I wonder whether I should, and then you think, do you know what, I think that I will. And then you think, oh my God, I can't. It becomes a very different thing in your life.
It really did. And like I said, I'm quite a determined individual. So not being able to stick to my plans first thing in the morning, 9 o'clock.
Frustrating.
And you're like, no, not going to have anything tonight. And then, I was also quite strict with smoking weed, where in the sense of I wouldn't do it during the working hours. I'd finish work, finish my daily routine.
So it's like wine o'clock for some people. It was it was the beginning of your winding down process at the end of the day.
It definitely was. And like I said, funny you say wine o'clock, because I actually used to also stand on the fence. I think alcohol is probably one of the worst of drugs out there, for how you feel the next morning, if you like, and your actions when you're under the influence of it.
Much worse than cannabis.
Oh, definitely. And like I said, I was an individual who could actually really do well underneath cannabis. I controlled it, I managed it. It made me feel good within myself.
Yes, exactly.
And it just came down to it just came down to the fact that it was an element of health where you're like, I've been smoking this
your chest,
for the last
your
20
lungs,
years.
and what have you. Start getting aches and pains in places that you think might be associated with your nocturnal habits. Well, what differences have you noticed in the 8 or 9 weeks? I mean, any sort of major differences?
Well, my wife would say I can stay up longer in the evening, not falling asleep at 9 o'clock on the sofa or 10 o'clock. Yeah. Is what I call baby sleep, because I'll be waking up later in the morning to go to bed later in the evening, earlier in the evenings. But for me personally, you mentioned on it, my dreams have come back now. Sleeping. Also the grogginess in the morning it was the big one as well.
Like a brain fog, like a cloudiness in the brain.
That's it. Yeah, no, definitely. So yeah, that's all cleared up now. It did. I'll be honest with you. It took me about 3 weeks to really come out of it, and it sounds like it was a struggle. It wasn't. It was just. I know it sounds silly. Deleting your restrictions. So I deleted numbers off my phone and made that connection a bit complicated. So when you went 1 week, 2 weeks, and then it became into a little bit of a personal gain for myself. Where you're like, oh, I've gone 1 week, I'll go another week.
It's like doing steps. It's like doing Wordle every day, getting a streak going. Is what you're trying to get a streak going, aren't you, Reece? That's what it is. That's a really good way of thinking about it. Well, I've done a week. Why can't I do 2? I've done 2. Why can't I do 4? Do you know what? Why would I go? Do you think that's it now? Do you think you're clear forever?
Do you know, after everything I've said, I miss the comfort it brings, but at the same time, it's becoming distant. And I know if I were to indulge again, the problem I would have is you'd buy a quantity and you wouldn't.
You can't leave it in the drawer.
Was gone.
You can't leave it in the drawer. You'd have to cane the whole lot before you could try again to go without it. Reece, thank you. So look, this isn't sort of earth-shattering, and I don't think we're hearing anything that necessarily diminishes the case for decriminalisation or legalisation. In fact, the easier it is to access, the more education there would be. And arguably, the less hazardous the whole situation would be. But these two stories, the head of I'm surprised there's only one cannabis clinic for psychosis in London, pointing out that there should be a lot more than one cannabis clinic for psychosis in the country, and Elton John railing against the decriminalisation across much of North America. So just a sort of launch point for a conversation. It's 11:43, Mystery Hour on the way at 12. I can tell you that you're familiar with Oz Kataji's work. He's largely been reporting for us from Kyiv, but he has, since we spoke to him on Monday, made his way to Syria. One of the first Western journalists into the country, and he'll be joining us after this to tell us what he's found.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:46. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Just a quick missing word round for you before we head direct to Syria. This is really interesting to me, and a little earlier than I expected to see it. Most blank now back free movement in pursuit of EU-UK reset. Most blank now back free movement in pursuit of EU-UK reset. We'll get back to that shortly. Oz Kataji is a journalist who spent 13 years covering the war in Syria. But I saw he messaged on social media this week that he couldn't believe that in his lifetime he would be able to visit a free Syria. And he's there now, and he joins us live on the line. Oz, how are you?
I'm incredible, James. It's a real experience here to be in Damascus, a free Damascus, a Damascus that was once, a country that was completely under totalitarian rule, and it feels like a huge burden has been lifted off the shoulders of the people living here. I've just been outside and inside former Syrian president. Need to get used to saying that.
Yes.
Bashar al-Assad's presidential palace. There are children here, people coming up to the palace, his house, with the revolutionary flag. Families here taking photos. The driver that I'm with, everywhere I go with him, he's absolutely stunned that we're even able to drive up to these places, even though he only lives 25 minutes away. He says he's never been able to go there because the security state wouldn't let him. So it's really, honestly, an incredible thing to witness with my own eyes.
So a sense of euphoria still very much in the air.
Absolutely, and tomorrow will be the first Friday prayers since the regime fell. The regime fell on early Sunday morning. So I expect tomorrow there to be some real celebrations in the city of Damascus. Now, I've just been outside Sednaya prison. We've just driven down from there slightly because there was no signal to call to you. So we're going up to investigate the awful torture and abuse of prison life. While there is this sense of euphoria and jubilation,
yes,
the real hard work now starts on accountability, on documenting all of these crimes that the Assad regime committed. And the new interim government here is very, very interested in hunting down and pursuing Syrian war criminals that participated in so many horrific war crimes and crimes against humanity against the Syrian people.
What else can you tell us about that new administration? Because in many ways that's the big question in play now, isn't it? Is whether or not the leader is going to prove to have put clear blue water between himself and some of his previous affiliations and associations.
Well, look, I'll try and be as brief as possible. Yes, it's true that this guy, Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani, that's his nom de guerre. As soon as the civil war ended, he changed his name back to his real name, Ahmed al-Sharaa, and he was affiliated with ISIS and Al-Qaeda over the course of many, many years. But over the course of about 7 years, the group has moderated significantly. They've had a Christian community living inside Idlib for several years under his control. And look, I know a lot of your audience are going to be really, really concerned. What does this mean for Christians? What does this mean for minorities? But I'm walking around in Damascus. I'm seeing minorities. There are Christmas trees up, Christmas fairy lights up. And the government, the interim government, have vowed to protect minorities. I'm not saying that your audience should just believe this because he said so. I'm saying they should hold him to account. But at the moment, They are saying they're going to protect minorities, and they seem to be acting in practice like that. Will that be the case in 5, 10, 15 years' time? I don't know. Today, I can tell you this new administration is at least attempting to show that it cares about all Syrians, not just Sunni Arab Christians. Again, you could take that with a pinch of salt because of his previous things, but I can only tell you what I'm seeing with my own eyes. And with my own eyes, there are Christmas trees up all around the place. So,
and in the areas,
that's the proof.
In the areas where he has previously held sway, the experiences of the people there, whether Christians or other minorities, have been encouraging, have been largely positive.
Yes, that's correct. And I'll tell you the most positive thing that I've reported on so far is there's an Ismaili community living in Syria. Now, for Sunni Muslims in particular, Ismailis are effectively apostates. And the head of faith of the Ismailis is a guy called the Aga Khan.
Yes, of course.
Now, the Ismailis handed over their villages peacefully to HTS rebels. And the reason they did that is because, reportedly, there is diplomatic relations between HTS and the Aga Khan. The HTS contacted the Aga Khan and said, we want to take control of these areas. We promise you we will keep your followers completely safe and protected. And that's what has happened. Now, that might seem very confusing to people to listen to, but let me put this clearly, in as clear language as possible. If this man was still Al-Qaeda and ISIS ideologically, he would have to put himself to death for having diplomatic relations with the head of faith of an apostate faith under this ideology. So the very fact that he's even communicating with them at all means that something has changed in practice, not in theory, in practice.
Yes.
And look, again, I want people to be skeptical. It's important to be skeptical. But all I can tell you is what's happening now. The regime's been fallen for 4 days. And since 4 days in, the religious and ethnic minorities are being protected in areas that HTS are now governing.
What else are you looking for, Oz? I appreciate that there is evidence that needs to be gathered by journalists and others with regards to accountability for the previous regime. I appreciate, as you've explained, that many people there will be keeping an eye on political developments. I suppose pragmatically, Western support will depend upon a retention of the direction of traffic that you've just described. What else are you looking for? What have you sort of, it may be too early to tell me, but what have you sort of charged yourself with on this mission?
One big word: documents. Documents, documents, documents. We want to preserve documents. This regime, like the Nazis, kept meticulous notes about the crimes they were committing. I was just at the presidential residence. There was some emails printed out showing, again, not the kind of documents I want, but he was ordering chandeliers from European companies. You know, it was really surreal to see that. Okay. What we're looking for is the kinds of documents they had on dissidents, and what I'm personally interested in is the kind of documents they had on regime sympathizers that live in the West. You know, people like George Galloway, people that have established relationships with the regime, have been regime propagandists for many years. If there's any connection in these documents that shows that they've received money from this regime, I will try to hand that information to law enforcement authorities, because I think we're in the next phase now. The regime has fallen, and now the criminals that participated in this or were accomplices to this need to be held to account by the courts of law.
Right, just to be clear, you're describing investigations and possibilities. No suggestion that anybody, named or unnamed, currently stands accused of any of the things that you've just said. I know you know that. I'm just clarifying it for everybody listening. And what about these Israeli bombardments then? I read some reports that said they may have compromised the kind of documents that you're so keen to get your hands on. I don't know. I mean, obviously, there's an awful lot of moving parts, but I think a lot of people have been surprised by the speed and the scale of Israeli aggression inside Syria.
Yeah, I mean, two things with that. One, I can't confirm or deny whether any documents have been damaged by Israeli strikes. The second thing is, as it stands, we're not seeing civilian casualties in these strikes. They are basically destroying the remaining military assets of the Syrian state because they don't want the rebels, who they don't trust, to have control of these military assets. Now, for a lot of people, they seem to think that Israel really was part of toppling the Assad regime. And if that's the case, I just want to ask them one question. Why was the Israeli government perfectly happy with military assets belonging to Assad staying in Assad's hands, and as soon as Assad's regime has fallen, they are now bombing those military assets? I think the proof, again, is in practice, is in looking at the actions of the Israeli government. Look, HTS has just taken control of Syria. They're not in a position to fight any kind of defensive war against Israel. So, effectively, there's nothing that can be done. The Israelis are going to come in and they're going to destroy what remains of Syria's military assets, and HTS are going to have to rebuild the state without any kind of functional military force, at least one that's not well equipped in the kind of sense that the previous military was.
That's a good question. I wonder how big a story it is for Syrian civilians, for sort of ordinary people that you're encountering and speaking to, how concerned they are about this element of the story that's drawn a lot of attention, understandably, in the West.
Look, I'll be honest, I think it's kind of drawing more attention in the West right now.
I thought you might say that.
It's all happening so quickly that people are still, coming to terms with the fact that this regime that governed over their lives for 53 years, that kidnapped and slaughtered members of their families, everywhere you go, there are people just weeping tears of joy at the fact that they're free. They're now free to walk around, to say what they want, to insult the regime, to insult Bashar al-Assad. It's an incredible thing to witness. I never thought I'd live to see it. So to walk around in a free Damascus as a journalist, as a queer journalist with my tattoos out on show, it's honestly sensational. I can't. Look, there's so much to be worried about the future of Syria. There's so much to be worried about whether this administration will keep to its word, whether there will be a democracy in Syria. But all of that work starts tomorrow. Let Syrians have the time to grieve their lost ones, to celebrate their freedom, to have hope, to build a brighter future for tomorrow, something that would never have been possible under the Assad clan.
And of course, finally, Oz, there are still reunions, I presume, unfolding that many people had given up all hope of ever witnessing.
Honestly, that's been some of the most heart-wrenching things to see. The people coming out of the prisons. Again, we're outside Sednaya prison. Thousands of people held there, including women and children. Women that were raped and forced to carry their babies to term in the prison. And these children have only known solitary confinement in their entire life. We're talking about a regime that is as monstrous as anything that's ever come before. And we're still digging through the very beginnings of that to get to the bottom of it, and hopefully in the future hold these people to account and prosecute them.
Where's the line between accountability and revenge, do you think? And that is my final question, I promise, because I know you've got a lot to do.
Look, I think the officer class of the Syrian army are going to be pursued.
Yeah.
What's the difference between that and revenge? There's already been an amnesty issued for Syrian soldiers conscripts.
Okay.
That's been issued. So anyone who's part of the Syrian armed forces has been given an amnesty. That says a lot to me about the difference between accountability and revenge. The regular soldier on the front line is getting an amnesty. He doesn't have to worry about being prosecuted. But those officers that ordered those crimes, they should live in fear of their lives for the rest of their lives. And the new administration has vowed to catch up with them and prosecute them. So whether that happens remains to be seen. But for now, that's the difference between accountability and revenge on the ground here.
Thank you, Oz. And stay on the line for this sign-off, if you would. It's just coming up to 12 noon. That's Oz Kataji, live from a free Damascus. And as he said, having spent, the entire duration of the war covering it and never expecting to be walking through the streets of that city in the circumstances that he finds himself doing so today. It's coming up to 12 noon. It's Thursday. That can mean only one thing. Mystery Hour is almost upon us. And given that was a slightly different run up to the 12 noon break than usual, it means you've got a slightly better chance than usual to get your question on the board if you dial 0345 6060 973 around about now.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Is that the time? 3 minutes after 12, and your weekly opportunity to achieve the sort of satisfaction not ordinarily available anywhere else on your radio dial is upon us. The second last one before Christmas. Does anyone remember when I did it dressed as Father Christmas? I did Mystery Hour. We'd had a Christmas-themed Mystery Hour, and I did it dressed as Father Christmas. It'd be about 7 or 8 years ago. We got it from one of the big West End costume agencies just up the road from here in London's fashionable Leicester Square. Anyway, I digress. If you're not familiar with this feature, it is a little bit different from what we do for the rest of the week, to say the very least. And it may not, at first description, sound anywhere near as exciting as it always proves to be. Someone rings in with a question, and then someone else rings in with an answer. And somehow, between those two positions, or within those two positions, the magic happens, like a form of radio alchemy, if you will. And you can win a board game. Still in time, I reckon. If you win it today, you'll still get it in time to give it off to someone else for Christmas. That's a win-win, isn't it? Not only do you get your hands on a wonderful Mystery Hour board game, but you can save yourself the hassle of having to buy somebody you care for a present. And it is something you should buy for somebody you care for. If you've got people you don't like because of their politics in your family, then buy them my book, How They Broke Britain, which would be something of an education for them. But you can find out more about the Mystery Hour board game at mysteryhour.co.uk. And you can find the full terms and conditions for this proper grown-up competition at lbc.co.uk. But that is it. Should we just crack straight on, I think? I do the guarantee again of having a laugh out loud moment between now and 1 o'clock. But you've already had your laugh out loud moment today when I was doing my hilarious Kemi Badenoch sandwich coverage. If that didn't make you chuckle, then you must be made of stone. But I bet you'll laugh again. 5 after 12 is the time. Should we crack on? I think we should. Oscar's in Northampton. Oscar, question or answer?
Hi, James. Question, please.
Carry on.
So, a guide dog, someone that's blind and needs an assistance dog, how does it know how to get you where you're asking?
We've done this before. To my embarrassment, I can't remember the answer. Why do you think seeing people are so fascinated by this, Oscar?
I think it's because we can't grasp what it's like.
Yes. Yeah, and we see it every now and then and find ourselves marvelling at what we're witnessing.
From a point of ignorance, I suppose.
I think that there are like established routes that are usually why am I even trying to answer this question? Even by my standards, this is a new low. I'll just put it on the board, Oscar, and wait until someone who can tell us. Although speaking of blind people, I saw Chris. Have you seen Chris McCausland's odds on Strictly Come Dancing? He's 25-1 on, which for people who are wisely not familiar with the world of gambling, that means that if you place a bet of £25, then you'll win £1 in the event of Chris McCausland. You'll get £26. You'll get your original £25 back, but you'll make a £1 profit in the event of the wonderful Chris McCausland romping home, as he seems to be very widely expected to do on Strictly Come Dancing. Is it this weekend? I presume the final is this weekend, is it? It's all imminent. And of course, there's a wonderful episode of Full Disclosure with Chris that you can find on Global Player or wherever you get your podcast. 6 minutes after 12 is the time. How do guide dogs know where to go? 0345 6060 973. Barbara's in Brighton. Barbara, question or answer?
Question, please, James.
Carry on, Barbara.
Why can't older people feel their nose dripping?
Sorry, what? Pardon?
Why can't older people feel
their nose
when they've
drip?
got?
Are you sure? Yeah. Are you speaking from experience? You sound far too young.
I'm speaking from experience. I'm nearly 70, and for about 10 years, I'm worried now. If I touch my nose, I have a drip.
Good Lord.
At the end of my nose, and I see older people on the train, and I think, wipe your nose. I'm doing it now. I can't feel it, but I have a drip.
I have a drip, but we call him Keith normally. I mean, obviously, I recognise what you're describing. You get a kind of it's a more of.
Yeah, it's not sort of full on,
I know. Are we sure that we noticed it when we were young?
No, it didn't definitely didn't happen when I was younger, and I only noticed it with older people.
Well, I was reading about eyes the other day, about the cornea thickening, which is why we find it harder to read in the dark. You know, when sometimes you go to a restaurant, Barbara, and you have to get your phone torch out because you can't read the flipping. So that's got something to do with the thickening. And I wonder whether something happens to our the nostril or what's the bit called, the sort of bottom of the septum. And it becomes
it's like a philtrum, is it?
It's just above the philtrum. The septum leads into the philtrum. I don't know if there's a name for the sort of junction between the septum and the philtrum, but it could have become a bit numb. You know, it could have become a bit less sensitive. That's the only real explanation I can think of. But anyway, I'll put it on the board. So, I mean, may I inquire politely how you deal with it? I mean, do you just wipe whether you need to or not?
I'm doing now, just wipe upwards,
Yeah, fair enough. What, sleeve or tissue?
No, palm of my hand.
Oh, you do the whole palm? Really? Well, you live and learn.
I'm home alone, so that's allowed.
Thank you, Barbara. 9 minutes after 12 is the time. I think she's right. You certainly notice it more on older people. Older men, I would have said, but but you notice it more, don't you? That sort of little globule of watery mucus that just gathers. What's the word? Collates on the bottom. Well, I never. It's all happening today. Just some phone lines free, by the way. If you can answer either of the questions that are on the board already, or of course, if you have a question of your own, then the number you need is 0345 6060 973. Lou points out it's kids as well. Well, actually, Lou says I'm crying laughing here. Isn't it kids as well who do? Yeah, kids don't know. There may be a flaw in the premise of Barbara's question, but we'll soon find out. Ryan is in Canterbury. Ryan, question or answer?
Hello, James. Lovely to talk to you. I have a question.
Carry on.
So I got divorced several years ago.
Yeah.
And I find now when I'm filling forms out, there's a question that says marital status. And I'd like to know why I have to tick the one that says divorced. Who needs to know that I used to be married and was rubbish at that and I'm not anymore?
Yeah. What sort of forms?
If I was applying for a bank loan or
well, I
found myself filling loads of forms out after getting divorced.
In case you're declaring your financial situation, and if you're divorced, there's a likelihood that you will have maintenance payments to make or calls upon your income that a married or a single person would not have.
But you could have that if you're not married. You could have children, and it just seems like a pointless question because I could have.
Yeah, but that's not your marital status. That's not. I mean, it might ask whether you're a parent or not, but it doesn't there, so it wouldn't. Well, maintenance for a partner, not for children.
Maintenance for a partner, okay.
For an ex, so you might be required to be paying maintenance to your ex, for example, and that would have an impact upon your credit rating, wouldn't it, or your ability to get a loan?
Yeah, okay.
I'm not giving you that. I'm not going definitive on this one.
I understand what you're saying, but you could have financial connections. Yeah, you could have financial connections, or children with anybody. You don't have to have been married to have that. So I just wonder why that question is there. Why that answer is there. That divorced.
Yeah.
I'm single.
Yeah, you're single. I mean, you are single. I know you are.
It reminds me every time I see the question.
I don't want to be divorced. You might be divorced, but that's in the past. I'm embracing the future. This is a brave new world of singledom.
Absolutely.
I'll try and find out for you. I mean, I imagine that the forms you're talking about are going to be largely financial, which is why I went off in the direction I went off in, but I could have got it completely and utterly wrong. It's a good question. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Here's a phrase we've never had on the show before. Gillian's been in touch. She says, please, 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 stop talking about nasal excretions. Are they excretions or secretions? That could almost be a mystery. I think they're excretions. What's the difference between an excretion and a secretion? A secretion. Anyway, I will, because Graham's also pointed out he's trying to eat his lunch. So I apologise for that. But hey, I can only work with the questions that I'm given. David's in Wood Green. David, question or answer?
Answer, please.
Carry on, David.
Well, it's the guide dog one.
Yes.
I feel a bit offended by the question because...
Yes, I think, I've already worked out why. So feel free to articulate your offence while providing your answer.
Okay. Well, the answer is that the owner knows where they're going and that the public give all the credit to the dog and don't notice that the owner is actually probably giving rather, not surreptitious, but understated commands to the dog.
Yes, it's an assistance dog.
That's right.
It is assisting. It is not as leading or herding like a sheep.
That's
the
right.
owner.
Yeah, I mean, you do. When you're learning a new route, you might well call on a sighted friend to go with you and the dog a few times. Well, once or twice.
Yes.
Then you've got it, and then you know what to tell the dog to do. So when you get to the corner, you know to tell the dog to go left, and you might do that by just twiddling your finger slightly to the left, or saying left rather quietly, or pointing your toe to the left, or all three. And the public doesn't see that, and they just think the dog's miraculous.
Got some sort of magical powers.
Yeah.
I could see why that would be irritating, actually. And of course, things like pedestrian crossings and things like that as well, albeit that you've got auditory guidance. The guide dog is going to know how to cope in certain scenarios.
Yeah, well, and there again, you see, you've got some crossings which have what's called a tactile cone.
Yes.
Which revolves, and you put your finger on it, and most of the public don't even know it's there, and so they think it's magic, or it's the dog
doing something, they're exercising some mysterious powers. I think we all know the answer to the next question. David, what are your qualifications?
About 40 years being a guide dog owner.
Lovely stuff. A round of applause for both of you.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much. It's coming up to 12:15. Perfect answer. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where Mystery Hour is underway. So one off the board already. Barbara's question about her nose. Is that all right? Can I say it like that without putting you off your sandwiches? Anyway, who cares if I'm putting you off your sandwiches? Because you know what? Sandwiches are for wimps.
James O'Brien on LBC.
16 minutes after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I like this from Michael. James, I've had my second laugh out loud moment of the hour when the lady asked about older people and their noses. I'm editing slightly so that Graham doesn't get put off his steak. It reminds me of an occasion when out walking with my little granddaughter, we stood to one side to allow an older lady to walk safely on the footpath. My granddaughter said, "That lady's just had a shower." I said, "How do you know?" And she said she hasn't dried her nose properly. I like that. Steve's in Watford. Steve, question or answer?
I've got a question.
Carry on,
if
Steve.
I can.
Of course you can.
Okay, so I thought I'd make it festive, as it's your one but last show.
Yes.
And so
just before Christmas, don't get people's hopes up. I'm definitely coming back in the new year.
I bloody well hope so. So, yeah.
Go on.
So my question is, do the big TV, companies for the TV adverts, do they talk about what background music they're going to use? So they don't all use the same Slade or Wizard or whatever it is. So
you mean so specific? I mean, the question holds true all year, whether or not there is any kind of consultation on what songs are already in the background on big adverts. But at Christmas, the pool is shallower. The number of Christmas crackers.
Exactly. That's the point.
I get it.
Pool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Do they have some sort of conflab?
I wouldn't have thought so.
And all the other supermarkets and whatever.
I wouldn't have thought so, but maybe when you're licensing it, something might happen. So when you're licensing it, you probably contractually would establish that no one else is using it during that season, wouldn't you? Because you've got to pay. You've got to pay for it, which means there's a contract. You can't just, download it willy-nilly and stick it on a TV advert. So when you do that, I imagine, and I'll wait for someone to explain, but I think I might have stumbled into the right answer entirely by accident. I imagine that part of the contract is exclusivity for a given period.
Yeah. You have make a valid point. I was hoping some marketing bot might come on and give us an answer.
I was hoping Roy Wood might come on and give us an answer, personally, or Noddy Holder. He's been around a bit this morning, hasn't he? But I think we've probably... I'm not going to give myself a round of applause, Steve, because that would be greedy. But I mean, it must be, mustn't it? You just like when Mateless recorded our sting for missed information. Oh, rats, I had one today. I had the first ever case of a double butt. I can still do it, can't I? No? Keith says not. He's a mystery hour purist, is Keith. So when Mateless recorded a sting for missed information, contractually, she's not allowed to do any more voiceover work for the whole of 2024, 2025 and 2026. That's it now for her. I hope she read the small print before she signed that contract. Thank you, Steve. Richard's in Highgate. Richard, question or answer?
Hi, James. It's a question.
Carry on, Richard.
Thank you. And the question is, are there any rules around what you're allowed to name a pub? So, for context, I was watching a well-known sitcom the other day when one of the characters wants to name a pub something awful.
Right.
Obviously, in reality, you wouldn't, but there's all sorts of opportunity for a sort of cheeky, innuendo-laden name for a pub.
Oh, I see what you mean. Like,
yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, like racehorses, actually. They sometimes have quite cheeky innuendo-laden names, don't they?
Yeah, exactly. So I was wondering if there's some sort of body that you have to send your name to, proposed name, and they say, no, you can't call it that.
I wouldn't have thought so.
No,
I like the question. Yeah. I mean, what's the sitcom? Don't say the name of the pub, but what was the sitcom?
Oh, I won't say the name of the pub. Don't worry. It was Peep Show.
Right.
So,
okay. Yeah.
Super Hands and Jez want to name something.
Coming up with possible pub names.
Yeah.
I can't. I mean, you've got all sorts of puns. Hairdressers are always going for puns. Kebab shops go for puns. I don't know is the short answer, but I'd be amazed if you do. I just think it would be good taste. There might be an obscenity clause, but that would apply to any business. You can't call, a burger joint effing great burgers or something like that, because it would breed. But I don't. We'll find out. What pubs in particular, businesses in general, are there any limits? What are the limits on the names that you can deploy if they are rude? Yes, yeah. That Peep Show episode. That is. I'm very, very, very glad, Richard, that you wisely elected not to remind us of the name of the pub that they are contemplating in that rather splendid sitcom. Bob's in Beverley. Bob, question or answer?
Answer, please.
Carry on, Bob.
So it's the dripping nose, we can refer to as that.
Oh, yes, okay. That'd be a good name for a pub.
Yeah. The horse and dripping nose. What we could do, as people get older, is my understanding, the senses fade slightly. And the part of the brain which manages ourselves as we go about life has to compensate for each of the fading senses more and more. And eventually we become less competent at things, become less sensitized, don't manage ourselves quite as well as we might in our younger days when our senses were.
So even I mean, we're all fairly clear about eyesight deteriorating and hearing deteriorating. So why should the sense of touch, which it is, I presume, the sense of touch that we're talking about, why would that be any different?
I suggest there's a bit of, it will fade away as the nerves age. But the general managing of oneself. So in our younger days, you've got a dripping nose, everything else is sharp and doesn't need more supervision.
Yeah.
As we get older, all the other senses need more supervision. So the bit of the brain that attends to going about our daily lives has more and more work to do, and I think eventually we just it starts falling off a bit. Our self-management falls off a bit.
Only if you don't wipe it.
Yeah,
I like it. Qualifications?
OU degree in psychology, no less.
Oh, I thought you were going to say I'm 112 or something like that.
Well, I'm sufficiently old to know that some of the stuff happens.
Con's been in touch to say we just don't care anymore.
Well, it could be that as well. But perhaps mine could be the basis of an answer from a proper expert, geriatric personal
Love it.
Expert.
Well played. Round of applause for Bob. Thank you, Bob. 23 after 12 is the time, so we can cross off Barbara's question about her nose. Bob and Barbara, how delightful. We've done the guide dog question, David and Oscar. Still need to know why Ryan has to, why you have a divorce box on forms when really you are single. What's the reason behind that? Are there any rules regarding pub names? Does anyone sort of decree that name for a pub, that potential name for a pub, is not acceptable? And how do they avoid ending up with the same Christmas song on two different Christmas adverts? If you can answer any of those, you know what to do. 03456060973. Jenny's in Chew Valley in Somerset. Jenny, question or answer?
Hi, James. Question, please.
Carry on.
So I wondered, my daughter's recently started secondary school and she's been telling me about all the fallings out between people.
Yes.
And she describes it as them having beef with each other. And I wondered, why do we describe it as having beef with people?
I don't know why I suddenly started thinking of Kemi Badenoch at that point.
No
beef.
comment.
No comment at all. And also, this call has come from Chew Valley, which seems oddly appropriate as well, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, there is that.
I'm trying to think. Sometimes I'm quite good on etymology. Sometimes these things pop into my head. Beef.
I feel like we need Susie Dent from Countdown or someone to
we
pop
do.
up.
There is no situation known to humankind, that wouldn't be improved by the presence of Susie Dent, Jenny. Another person, it's getting ridiculous now, another person who provided a rather splendid full disclosure interview earlier this year. Beef, I'm thinking birth. Beef steak.
Because any other meat would sound stupid, but then the more you think about this one sounds stupid as well.
You've got chicken.
So,
I've got chicken with that fella.
I've got turkey with them.
I've got turkey. I've got pork. Gammon might work. It's all gone a bit gammon. I like it. What's your daughter's name? You don't have to tell me. I just.
She'll love it. Ada. She'll love a shout out. She'll be ever so proud. I've been trying to get on for ages, so this is like Christmas.
There it is. You're on. We'll find out. Otherwise, Ava's going to have beef with Jenny if we don't get an answer to this question. 25 minutes after 12 is the time. Thank you, Jenny. Why do we talk about beef? Having beef with someone. I've got beef with you. I don't remember it being around much when I was young, if at all, actually. But it's certainly come across it a lot now. They've got beef. Simon's in Littlehampton. Simon, question or answer?
Hello, James.
Hello.
I've got a question for you.
Carry on.
And this has been bugging me since I was a kid.
Crikey.
Because it's a real weird pronunciation.
Oh, the pressure's on now.
I've never understood it. So, Kansas and Arkansas.
Yes.
Identical spelling, by the first bit. Massively different pronunciation. Why? I don't know if this is one Mark to phone you. He's Mark, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I don't know how good he is on American nomenclature. I mean, is it why is this more surprising than there must be lots of other examples of this where you stick?
I was actually looking at a map a few months ago and seeing there must be others similar.
But you
there's not.
No, I'm just.
I mean, there was a lot to get through on the map of America.
Well, what about Leominster? So Kidderminster is very near Leominster, which of course is spelled Leominster. So that I mean, why isn't it Kimster?
Yeah, true.
Arkansas, Little Rock. They're both states, right?
Yes.
Arkansas and Kansas. Was it ever Arkansas? Arkansas.
Well,
maybe they started. Maybe they did it to distinguish because a lot of Northerners arrived. And they started talking about Arkansas. It's Arkansas. I'm from Arkansas. And everyone thought they just meant their own Kansas. So that's not going to be it, is it? It's not.
No, but
I like it. I've got Sean Keaveney on Full Disclosure this week with his wonderful Lancashire accent. Our arms. Right, I'll find out I'd say I'll find out. I feel bad because it's been puzzling you since childhood, but it may well be that nobody knows. There may not be. Bicester.
This is similar.
Not Bicester. Leicester, you see, still get Americans queuing up outside here, just where I am, in Leicester Square. Excuse me, sir, could you direct me to Leicester Square? Why wouldn't it be like Leicester, Bicester, Cirencester? Simon, thank you. I shall try and find... Why is it Arkansas and Kansas? Kansas and Arkansas. Why is the S silent in Arkansas? The second S is silent in Arkansas, despite the fact that it's spelt identically to Kansas. From the K onwards. John's in Croydon. John, question or answer?
Question for you, James.
Okay. Carry on, John.
So basically, I work for a plumbing company, and over the years...
Hang on a minute. How can I ask you about... Are you any good with incinerators?
Yeah, well, as good can be. They're not very pleasant things, but
they're not. How likely is it that my button is stuck as opposed to something more serious going on?
Sometimes the button is made of a plastic behind the back that splits, so that could just be a simple solution to changing a bit more easy than you think, but you could be on the right lines there.
Because it's still working. I just have to turn it off at the mains because the button is stuck down.
Yeah, that's quite a common fault. Is it still within its warranty?
Probably, yeah, but I don't know where that would be. Okay, what about, would this work, and don't laugh, if I get, those sucker darts in toy guns?
What, to pull it back out?
Yeah.
Well, sometimes they work basically on the principle that there's a plastic mechanism on the back that uses air to push through to the actual button to relieve it, if not the electric ones. So it may be a case of using that.
Okay, I'll have a look later. Anyway, thanks for that. What do I owe you?
Just if you can finally answer this question, this will be brilliant.
It's a deal. Go on.
So basically, we've used a variety of jumpers for our uniform. The ones we're currently using are 96% polyester, but they always seem to have blotchy red marks come over them. They're blue and black jumpers, not containing the colour red at all.
Right.
We think it may be to do with some of the products we use, such as a flux, which is a cleaning agent, or a Boss White, which is like a paste that you can use.
Yeah.
The thing with that is that if you get a large dollop of said product and smear it on your jumper, it will not then cause...
You've done this, have you? Red. You've done a proper experiments in laboratory conditions.
Yeah, because
good.
You imagine there's, say, 10 of us, 10 different people doing different washing, different contagions, all of the rest of it. No common denominator other than the products that we use, you'd think. But when
Nothing
you
doing.
excessively pour it over that to say, right...
Well, have you done another experiment where you just maybe dip a brush in it and flick it at your jumper and then leave it for a while?
Not quite. We're due to get new uniform in the new year, so I might try that.
Well, no, don't do it. Oh, you mean you'll do it with the old one?
Yeah.
What's the other 4%?
Elastifane something.
What?
Give me I know. Hang on. Give me a moment.
All right, don't put your neck out trying to read the label. I did that once. Breaking news on LBC.
Elastane.
Elastiane.
That's it.
So it's quite stretchy then.
Yeah, but we've had...
That sounds horrible, mate. Stay away from Naked Flames, won't you? 96% polyester and 4% elastiane. You go up like a Christmas
like
tree.
We're going up.
Well, it's a good job you're a plumber. There's lots of water nearby.
Usually wet.
So little red blotches on your black and blue jumpers, 96% polyester and 4%.
But this would be of like the... sorry to name the names, but Fruit of the Loom, or what you'd think of your school children's jumper or something like a round neck that you'd wear in primary school. They've been part of what we wear as well. Similar problems.
Okay, so what are plumbers likely to be doing that would explain the presence of little red blotches all over their work clothes? I like it. Thank you, John. I'll let you know how I get on. I did ask the last plumber to ring in about a month ago the same question, but I sometimes I'm a little bit slow. A little bit slow to act. I went into one toy shop trying to find those arrows, and they didn't have any, so I kind of forgot about it for a while. It is, because we've got two sinks, so, I'm just at the moment, I'm not using the one with the incinerator in it. Amelia Cox here with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:34. Thank you, Don. Don's given me some detail on how I can undertake a DIY repair to my waste disposal unit in my kitchen. Thank you, Don. It's all happening on the show today. It's amazing, isn't it? Two Sinks O'Brien, Lewis suggests, will be my new nickname. It's not quite got the same ring as Two Jags Prescott, but let's hope it sticks. Okay, a few of you picking up on this. Jake writes, ooh, get you, James. Two sinks, eh? Yeah, all right, flipping heck. I'll tell you what else I do. I have steak for lunch. I have people bring it to me because the sandwiches are woke. It is 12... Oh, no, that's the leader of the opposition. It's 12:34. Questions still needing answers, but still room for more questions. 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. Tony's in Stockton-on-Tees. Tony, question or answer?
Answer.
Carry on.
The divorce question. So once you've finalised your divorce and you've got no financial ties to the person you divorced, you are no longer divorced and you are now classed as single. It's on a finance application, so that if you were applying for finance and you were going through a divorce, you could have a house and a car. They could then loan you £20,000, and then your other half takes everything you've got. You can no longer afford to pay the loan back.
So say that last bit again.
So once everything's finished with your divorce...
No, that was the first bit. What was the last bit about the car loan?
So if you were applying for a £20,000 loan...
Yes.
On paper, you could look like you could afford it. You had a house and a car.
Yeah, exactly that.
But as the divorce is finalised and you lose whatever you lose during the divorce, you may no longer be able to afford it.
So it's a form of credit check. It's a type of financial situation audit, and it's a known unknown in that if you are divorced, then you may have outgoings which you wouldn't declare in any other circumstances because they wouldn't come down as rent or they would come out of your wages without being recorded anywhere else.
Yes. But as soon as it's all finalised and your divorce is over, you're classed as single again.
But the box is there. So Tony doesn't actually need to tick divorced if he's got no financial responsibilities to his ex.
No, he's now classed as single. It actually reduces or puts a negative factor on your credit application.
When you tick divorced?
Yes.
Yeah, of course it does. So I actually got this 100% right, but I was just speculating. You're going to get the round of applause. So I want to be 100%, well, I say that. I can't be 100% clear, but to the best of your knowledge, what are your qualifications first?
I'm a finance manager.
All right, great stuff. So, and to the best of your knowledge, if he has absolutely no financial responsibilities to his ex, then he won't get into any trouble whatsoever for ticking single rather than divorced.
100% he is single.
Okay, round of applause. He's going to be delighted, is Ryan, with that. I think he was. You could tell it was weighing on his mind. Good news for Ryan. 12:37 is the time. Oh, I better start thinking about who's going to get the old Mystery Hour board game. Andrew is in Stallbridge in Dorset. Andrew, question or answer?
Nice to speak to you again. I've got a question.
Carry on.
I'm not quite sure how to phrase this, but I'm wondering why do some ships or boats have, at the front, underneath the water, some have a very kind of bulky nose on them, don't. Sure why.
Yeah, your phone line's a bit weird. It keeps, but I got the gist of it. It's just cutting out a tiny bit. Well, like an underwater prow that goes out further than the overwater prow.
Like a trireme, like a Roman trireme or something like that. But it doesn't seem to be related to the size of the boat.
Where it goes.
What it's related to.
So it's good. Was it going to be like for ice? Could it be an ice thing or?
So you see them on oil tankers, you see them on fishing boats, but you don't see them on like... The reason the question came up is because I saw the Titanic out of dock and it didn't have one.
Okay.
And it just made me wonder.
Whether it should have done. Okay, I mean, I can't quiz you any further because oddly your phone line's getting worse, not better. But I think I've got an image of it. Keith, have you got a mental image of it? Do you know what he's talking about? And it comes out further than... So that's the boat and then there's something down here. Okay, I've never clocked that before, so someone will know what it's for. I presume it's to push stuff out. But then, who knows? Get it? Knows. Who knows? Boats knows. Thank you, Andrew. It's on the board. It's on the list. Dan's in Croydon. Dan, question or answer?
Hello, mate. I have an answer.
Bring it on.
Beef, not the sandwiches. But
do you believe in sandwiches? Do you believe in sandwiches?
Depends what's in them.
Yeah, always. Go on.
Not steak sandwiches, though.
No, beef.
It comes from Cockney rhyming slang.
Does it?
Hot beef is what would be shouted, which is stop thief, and it's when that's what I've learned to know.
Really? Hot beef?
Hot beef is stop thief, and it is when you've got an issue with someone. When there's a problem, you'd shout it, and then that just got brought onto the streets and turned into a slang term.
Hot beef as rhyming slang for thief.
Hot beef is rhyming slang for stop thief.
Hot beef, stop thief. Why wouldn't you just shout stop thief?
I mean,
you're going to have half the country, half the people are going to go there going, yeah, well, that doesn't matter, does it? It's not a matter of urgency when you say go up the apple and pears. You could turn around and say, what are you talking about, you weirdo? And they say, oh, it's rhyming slang for stairs. You shout hot beef and someone turns around and says, what are you talking about, you weirdo? And you say, that thief over there, he's gone now. I'm trying to explain what hot beef means and he's legged it.
It's because they're all sat down having their lunch.
He's halfway home. It's not stop thief. I'm not. Well, what are your qualifications?
I grew up in Croydon, mate, where the English language is a forgotten.
Croydon, the well-known. It's not even within the sound of Bow Bells in Croydon.
No, but we.
So when did you? You've just made this up. You've completely. No, yes, you have. You've never had this explained to you. All right, who told you this?
This is something that I wanted to figure out because I was wondering why everyone had beef with me.
You did not. I'm not giving you a round of applause. This doesn't happen very often anymore, but I'm just not buying it. Not least because tea leaf is a well-known rhyming slang for thief.
Well, I tell you what. If you don't get an answer, Google it when you're finished.
I will.
And if I'm wrong, I'll have one later.
Okay, it's a deal. You're not going to get one. It's as safe as houses. Hot beef, stop thief. Honestly, that's the most stupid rhyming slang imaginable. It'd be like sort of having rhyming slang for your trousers are on fire and you're too busy trying to work out what they're saying. You're burnt. Thank you, Dan. Obviously, the more condescending and patronising I am with wrong answers or indeed with bad questions, the more likely it is that I will turn out within about 10 minutes to be completely wrong. If it is going to be rhyming slang, it's going to be grief, isn't it? Oi, Dan, come back. It's going to be grief. I've got beef.
I mean, I don't know why stairs are apples and pears.
Don't get worried, because a bit of rhyming slang is nice, but don't give me grief, or we'll have beef. We've got beef. We've got grief. Beef, grief.
Well, yeah,
grief,
maybe.
Beef.
But the whole idea
makes more sense than stop thief.
If you were thinking logically, but the whole idea of it was that the police didn't understand your conversations.
Yeah.
So
which makes stop thief an absolutely meaningless intervention in this case. I'm pretty sure it'll be grief, but no one gets a round of applause at this point. We'll see. Chris is in Harrow. Chris, question or answer?
I've got an answer for you, mate.
Go on.
So, cut long story short, for the plumber,
Yeah.
When he said that he uses he gets all the red dots over his uniform.
Yeah, I've got a message from an engineer who says they do as well, so it might be something. He thinks it might be the WD-40.
It's either the WD... No, I haven't had that one. That's a new one.
Yeah, go on.
It's the flux. So when you're welding,
it's the what?
It's the compound we use to clean the flux.
Oh, steady on, mate. It's a family programme. I don't believe it. He's bloody right about hot beef. I could go mad, couldn't I, on this show? Dan's right. Brian's with Stop Thief to... Oh, anyway, let's pretend that never happened. It's all about the flux. What's a flux?
Flux is a compound you use when you apply it on a pipe for soldering. You use it to make sure the solder goes all the way around. It cleans all the dirt and the debris.
An engineer would be using that as well, then?
Yeah, definitely. I mean,
pipe work. Anyone doing pipe work?
Installs. Yeah. And then what you do, when you get the brush, a lot of people use the flux afterwards to clean the pipe up, so it makes it all nice and shiny, and then you wipe it with a wet cloth.
And you get a bit of that on your jumper, and it's going to go red because it's a powerful acid or alkaline or something.
It's like bleach. When you get bleach stuck on your clothes as well,
it doesn't turn them white. It does something that dyes. It's a paste. It's metal surfaces. Anything that you apply, that anyone who works with metal surfaces to solder is likely to be using flux.
100%.
Plumbing and heating.
Plumbing and heating. Yeah, man.
Love definitely. It. That's a great answer. Qualifications.
I've been doing the job for about 20 odd years. So.
Any good with incinerators?
Oh, mate, I've been, I've heard about your dilemma. It's the button. I'll probably say it's the button.
It's all about the button. Round of applause for Chris.
The button and the hot beef, mate.
And the flux. And the flux. Don't forget the flux. It's lovely. Great answer. Toby's in Strasbourg, in Austria. Toby, question or answer?
Answer, James.
It's not Strasbourg. But how do I pronounce it? Salzburg, sorry. What have they written? Anyway, carry on.
Where Mozart was born.
I know where Salzburg is. I just don't know why they've written Strasbourg on my screen, because that's not in Austria.
No, it's France.
Yeah, Salzburg.
Anyway, Kansas, Arkansas.
Yes.
It's French pronunciation. Because up till 1803, up till the Louisiana Purchase, these territories were French. And if you were French, you would pronounce it Kansas, Arkansas. And that's where it comes from.
Kansas, Arkansas? Would you?
Yeah.
Arkansas? Was Kansas part of the Louisiana Purchase as well, or just Arkansas?
Kansas, Arkansas, Iowa, Minnesota, Dakotas,
Minnesota,
parts of Wyoming.
Wyoming. They were all French. Well, there you go. So the French pronunciation would, and that makes the comparisons with English place names that are pronounced differently, despite apparently being spelt the same, make more sense because it's quite idiosyncratic, but it's an established practice.
There you
go. Qualifications.
When I was 15, I spent a summer in Overland Park, which is a suburb of Kansas City, Kansas.
Yes.
And the mother of the host family was from Little Rock, Arkansas.
Oh, gosh.
So the issue came up and she explained it to me. So I cannot verify it if it's really true.
No, that's perfect. That's a beautiful answer. That's absolutely beautiful. Have a round of applause on me.
Thank you.
I'm not getting Dan back to apologise because lots of people now are accusing him of having Googled it. And you're right, he gave it away at the end, didn't he? When he said, I'll tell you what, why don't you Google it? And I thought, what's he saying that for? He knows something. That hot beef, Stop Thief. Honestly, who'd have thought it?
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 12:47. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Paddy's texted, "Justice for Dan. Justice for Dan. Justice for Dan." I'm not having it. There's a real breakdown here. Remember, I've got a Mystery Hour ball game to give away. There's a real breakdown here. It could be that Dan is a victim of a terrible miscarriage of justice and therefore deserves to win the Mystery Hour ball game. Because I mocked his answer, even though it turned out to be correct. Halfway through mocking people, that little voice appears in the back of my mind going, stop mocking him. It's Mystery Hour. When you mock people, it's you that ends up looking stupid, James. And lo and behold, hot beef is rhyming slang for stop thief. I'm confident, because it didn't happen during Mystery Hour, that my mockery of Kemi Badenoch earlier in the programme for eschewing sandwiches as a viable food source and instead preferring steak to be brought to her at her table, I don't think I'm going to regret that mockery. Although quite a few of you, and it wasn't Mystery Hour, I stress, have pointed out that she appears to be channeling Meryl Streep's character in The Devil Wears Prada. Meryl Streep's character in The Devil's Wears... She throws it in the sink. She orders that steak be brought to her. Oh, man alive. You wouldn't put it past her, would you? She thinks she's forgotten where she saw someone powerful and strong ordering steak to be brought to her table. She's forgotten where she saw it, so she's told the Spectator that it was her own idea. I'm brought steak, and then claims that she eats at her desk while she's working, which leaves the mystery hanging of how the hell you eat a steak while also writing, typing or reading without using cutlery, which means you can't... Anyway, I digress. Dave's in Cheltenham. Dave, question or answer?
I have an answer for you, James.
Carry on, Dave.
The ship's bows. It is called a bulbous bow.
A bulbous what?
And it's a bulbous bow.
A bulbous bow. Do you know what? Do you know what Roxy's written on my screen? She's written a bulbous bowel with an L.
Well, that will be a whole different speciality.
Do you remember? I revealed yesterday that the last time I went to A&E, without going into too much detail, but that is quite uncanny that the words bulbous bow. And do you know what I've just done? I've blamed it on Roxy when it was Eleanor, the producer, who has an English degree, who's come up with bulbous bow. Bulbous bow. So no, a bulbous bow. Bow. B-O-W.
Yes,
bow.
That's it.
And what's it for?
So it is there to break the surface tension of the sea just ahead of the ship, which reduces drag and improves fuel consumption.
Then why wouldn't everyone have one? Every vessel have one?
Well, two reasons. Firstly, it only works at quite specific speeds and hull types. And second reason is that they're actually not as effective as they should be.
Okay.
And CAD design and improves and in design have actually meant that they're less common than they used to be.
Qualifications?
Marine engineer, 20 years at sea.
That'll do nicely. Have a round of applause.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much. Peter's in Charlton. Peter, question or answer?
I've got a question for you, James.
Carry on, mate.
Big fan of the show, by the way.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah. Right, so I saw a jogger quite a while back, and he had no arms.
Right.
And it got me thinking about the cardiovascular system, blood in the body. So my question is, if you are an amputee, does the human body account for the amount of blood in your body? Or do you still carry the same amount as someone who isn't?
Oh, I see what you mean. Well, surely you'd have an arm's worth of blood less than someone with an arm.
That was my logic, because my logic was...
Well, how did you talk yourself out of it?
Well, my way of thinking was, if you are missing both legs and both arms, it just seems like that's a lot of blood to carry in the body.
But there's no way that someone with no legs and no arms has got the same amount of blood in their body as someone with 2 legs and 2 arms. There's just no way. I'm doing it again. But, it can't be. It just can't be. You'd be enormous.
Yeah, that was my logic, but...
All right. I mean, who's going to know? I don't know if it's a field of inquiry particularly, is it?
Well, someone in the medical industry must know, surely.
You're just going to be one arm short, blood-wise. An arm's worth of blood down, surely.
Yeah.
All right. I like it, but I don't like it, if you see what I mean. I like the way your brain works.
Yeah, I apologise for the morbidity of it, but...
It's not... Well, I don't know I like that, but we shall... I'd be amazed if we get an answer to that. I don't, because I simply don't know who would have know it for sure. I mean, everyone just anyway. It's on the if you have lost a limb, do you have less blood in your remaining body than you would have if you still had the limb? 0345 60609 73. It's all happening this week. Dan's in Oxford. Dan, question or answer?
Hello, James.
Hello.
I have an answer.
Marvellous. Carry on.
It's the pub name question.
Yes.
There is a body which will vet your name.
Is there?
So, yes, there is. So you will effectively, when you're filling out your form to start your business, you'll put your name, your suggested name, or the name that you want to use for the pub on the form. You'll send it off to the local authority, which is your council.
Yeah.
And they will turn around and say yes or no whether they want that name or cast all over the pub in which the town that you are.
And is this unique to pubs, or would it apply to other businesses, other premises as well?
I would assume it applies to other premises, but it definitely applies to pubs.
How do you know? Qualifications?
Landlord.
And you have submitted a pub title, a pub name?
Well, ours was already... the name was already established, yeah.
Well, you don't know then? You've never done it?
We still had to fill the form out with the name on there.
What, to take over the licence?
To take over the licence, yes.
I like it.
That's the thing, it's all licensed. and it's licensed, it's very strict, isn't it?
What is your pub called? If you don't have to tell me.
The pub is the Abingdon Arms in Beckley.
The Abingdon Arms in Beckley,
just outside of Bicester.
But I'm just outside of Bicester. Nice part of the world. Do you have any guest ales on at the moment?
We have a very nice guest ale on. It's called the Ploughmans.
Ooh, tell me more.
We also have a fantastic selection of locals, which is our big thing.
Is that your USP?
That's our USP. And our garden. Our garden looks over the entire Otmore, and it's absolutely fantastic.
There's a million different reasons to visit.
Shameless plug.
No, it's not a shameless plug, because I invited you to do it, you see. It's only shameless if you smuggle it in uninvited, and then you end
fantastic.
up... Okay, so... an uncontroversial name. If you tried to name it something like, I don't know, I don't want to speculate now because I'll embarrass myself, then they could have come back and said, you can't call a pub that.
Very much so, yes.
And you do sometimes hear stories about councils going for often something related to the slave trade or something like that on street names and pub names. A round of applause for Dan, though. I like that. It's 12:55. It was a bit. I knew I was thinking of something. It's Tony Hancock, isn't it? The blood donor. That's an arm. Oh dear, it made me laugh. Mark's in High Wycombe. Mark, question or answer?
It's an answer, James.
Carry on.
It's the amount of blood in your body if you lose limbs.
I've done it again, haven't I?
What's that?
I've made a muppet of myself by laughing at that question.
I didn't hear it because I was on the phone calling in.
Go on then.
You do have the same amount of blood in your body.
How do you know?
Because I once had a drink with Billy Monger in Abu Dhabi at the Formula One Grand Prix, and he told me that when he's flying, he has to leave his legs on because if he doesn't, he can't get his legs back on.
Well, how does that prove he's got the same amount of blood in his...
Because he then went on to say it's because you still have the same amount of blood in your body.
It just said...
Your body doesn't know, it just keeps...
Billy Monger, for people who don't know, is a racing driver, wasn't he? He works in the media now, I think, doing commentary and stuff like that. And
yeah, he had a horrible accident.
At Donington. I don't know if this counts as going definitive. I mean, I don't... Does it? I mean, you've got an amputee telling you.
He was told by a specialist that. So
he's got the same amount of blood in his body after the amputation that he had before the amputation.
Yes.
Well, I can't argue with you, can I? Even by my standards, that would be a bit inappropriate. But okay, I know you are. I know. I'm struggling with it. I'm not. It just seems a bit counterintuitive, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, but the way I see it is your body doesn't know you haven't lost your legs and you have the same amount of blood as it is.
Yeah? Where does it go?
I don't know.
I'm going to give you a round of applause.
Get a doctor on.
You're right. I'll give you a round of applause because, the qualifications are impeccable. But neither of us get it, do we? I've got to be honest. It's 12:57. Crikey, let's crack on. Ronald is in Kfar Sava in Israel. Ronald, question or answer?
An answer, James.
Carry on.
To the question about the usage of the song in more than one advertisement.
Yes.
If you want to use a song or piece of recorded music, you have to apply for what is called a synchronization license.
Right.
And these can cost a lot of money.
Of course.
So you would then want to protect yourself that the same song isn't used for a similar advertisement or any advertisement at all. So a time limit is put on during what the rights owner can license a song for another synchronization license.
I love it, and I kind of worked that out when Steve was asking the question. But you speak with an authority, Ronald, that leads me to ask you, what are your qualifications?
I've been in the music industry for about 60 years, originally in the UK, and I moved out to Israel, and I've been here for just over 40 years.
As an exec or as an artiste?
As an exec.
Round of applause for Ronald. Thank you. Synchronisation, I didn't know the technical term, but of course you're not going to pay a fortune to use Noddy Holder's Slade's Christmas song in an advert if some other Tom, Dick or Harry could have an advert in the same season with the same song. Lovely stuff, Ronald, thank you. An agreeably international flavour to Mystery Hour this week as well, with both Israel and Austria on the board. I suppose I'm going to give the Mystery Hour board, I'm going to give it to Jenny and Ava. because I think that would really make Ava's day when she gets home from school. First year at secondary school, not only did her mum get onto Mystery Hour, and we got a decent answer, which Dan had definitely Googled, which is why he's not getting it. But then she finds out she's won the Mystery Hour ball game as well, just in time for Christmas. Which means, of course, now that Jenny can't play this to Ava, because she's probably going to wrap the Mystery Hour ball game up and put it in under the tree and pretend that she'd actually bought it, which you can do by going to mysteryhour.co.uk. I think that's everything. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. At 4 on LBC, Tom Swarbrick will be here. But now, as I head off for lunch, which is for wimps, it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.